All right, here we are, the 100th episode of the Smoke-Filled Room. 2 years in the making to build towards this. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. It's going to be tough. It's going to be arduous, but we've got to have this debate. We're not going to win if we can't come together and find some common ground. Of course, we're not going to agree on everything, but where's that common ground where we can start to win? Because we've got the opportunity here to get some wins. We've seen it. Obviously, we saw Trump gained in Illinois. We've seen positive signs, Hispanics moving towards us. You see the far left in the state who controls, who dominates the Democratic Party. Voters don't like them. They don't agree with them. There's a way we can win, but not until we start to find some way to work together and to stop tearing each other down. That's the goal of this podcast, the Great Illinois Republican Debate. We have people on here, not milquetoast people. We made sure we found outspoken people, conservatives, moderates, grassroots, establishment, north, south. We've purposely picked the people who will be on this podcast because they're passionate about what they believe in. It's going to mean some disagreement. This may not go great. I don't know. We're going to find out. But there's no way we're going to come together if we just all say, oh, yeah, let's all agree on everything, kumbaya, because we don't like each other. That's the reality in Illinois. The different segments of the Republican Party, we just don't like each other. And so we're going to have on air together, we're going to see this debate unfold. How can we find some way to move past the disagreements and find some of that common ground? It's not an accident that I'm sitting here. The Lincoln desk from when he served in the state house down in Vandalia, this is his desk, and it's an illustration, a visual, a powerful visual of our need to come together. Lincoln was that great unifier, brought us together as one of the founders of the Republican Party. Can we find some way to follow in his footsteps, to find that commonality, to find some unity? Not everything, but can we find some common ground? That's the goal. So this podcast, I have a feeling it's going to get heated. I have a feeling it's going to go long, but we need to have this discussion. This isn't a tactical debate. We know we've got to get better at vote by mail, voter outreach, messaging, fundraising, grassroots, 10 more things we've got to get better at. But that'll never happen if we don't find some way to work together. So we're going to have a big discussion about what are the challenges, what's led to us being disunified and not liking each other, how can we see a path forward? And one thing I hope that comes out from this is and not or. I've long believed that part of our challenge is that it's always or. You're either a conservative or a moderate. You're either a grassroots or an establishment. We need a candidate who can win statewide who has to be pro-choice or has to be pro-life. It's so much or. It's division. We're set up to fight against each other using that word, but the reality is we agree on so much more than we disagree on. If we could think and, we need conservatives and moderates. We need grassroots and establishment. We need north and south. That's the only way we're going to see a path forward. And so I hope in today's discussion we see some of that. And yes, I feel this way, you feel that way, but you know what? Right here is the and. We can work together here and bring the best of all worlds, instead of just tearing each other down. So I hope this visual helps with that. But a programming note, I can't do the 100th episode and not have a cigar. So my producer and I, when we finish this intro, we're going to take the Lincoln desk out of the studio, bring in a cheap desk. Just so you know, I would never disrespect the Lincoln desk and smoke a cigar here. So when you see me smoking, I won't be sitting at this very, very special desk. I'm going to go rip off this jacket because this is going to be a heated discussion. And let's get right into it. The Great Illinois Republican Debate as SFR's 100th episode. Well, here we go. Let's just get right into it. We're going to find a path forward with 7 of us, but 6 panelists who are outspoken center-right people in the state of Illinois, people with strongly held beliefs. And we're going to see, can we find commonality between all of us? So let me do some introductions. Everybody who's here isn't just one thing. However, we've been really intentional about making sure we bring people onto this panel who represent certain segments of our party, because if we're going to come together, every segment of our party needs to have a voice in this discussion. So as I do these introductions, I'll talk about who covers which of those segments, but none of the people that are here are one thing. Let's do this from conservative and work our way from there. So representing conservatives, we've got Collin Moseley. He's the director of the Illinois Freedom Caucus. Collin, thanks for being here with us. Hopefully this goes okay.
Yeah, hey, good to be here. And hey, badge of honor as the resident conservative. I'll take that.
I figured you wouldn't hate it. We also have with us, representing moderates, we've got Pfingsten, who's been so frustrated by the party, I don't think he even calls himself a Republican anymore. So this is going to be a good test on can we find common ground. Pfingsten is the founder, editor, and producer of the Illinois. He's also the morning show host for WMAY News and the host of the Ground Game podcast. What's up, buddy? You ready for this?
Bring it on.
I know Chris is already ready to start poking you just to see if he can make your vein pop out on the podcast. All right, that's not the only split we have in our party. We also have trouble getting along between the grassroots and the establishment. So, representing the grassroots, we have with us Kristina McCloy. She's the founder of the Concerned Parents PAC and is also a trustee in Downers Grove Township. Kristina, glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I love the show, and thanks, Lane, for setting this all up. You guys are great. I really enjoy it. Thanks for having me.
Producer gets a shout out already in minute 2. He's going to love that. All right, and we have representing not just the establishment, but of course somebody who's been elected statewide and is still to this day one of our highest vote getters in the last decade in Illinois. We've got Leslie Munger, former state comptroller, deputy governor, also vice chairman of the Lake County Republicans, and a precinct committee person. Leslie, how are you?
I'm great, Collin. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad you went through that whole thing, because when I heard I was the establishment, I'm like, I'm the establishment. I feel like I'm kind of a mutt. I'm a grassroots. I'm a precinct committeeman. I'm in township leadership, and I've had the opportunity to be a candidate and also lead at a high level. So I think I have a good overall view, but I'm glad to not be pigeonholed as a
Yeah, well, and we'll talk about that today and how that word has become such a bad word. But the reality is, if you've been elected for more than 5 minutes, suddenly you've become the establishment. And we'll talk about, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. That'll be one of our topics. We always have with us, of course, political team. We've got Michael Butler, Chris Jackowiak. So Michael Butler, as everybody knows, leans more right. Chris Jackowiak tends to lean more center and even sometimes left, though sometimes they surprise us. They also bring a little bit of a downstate versus Chicagoland, with Butler being from central/southern Illinois and Chris being up from Chicagoland in the south suburbs. So they're going to bring a lot of different perspectives to the podcast as well. Michael, Chris, welcome as always.
Looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good discussion.
Let's get it on. Let's do it. All right. I'm going to be your moderator, as I said. My goal here is to be sort of an arbitrator, if you will, or neutral in this case. I'm going to push back if somebody's making a point that isn't necessarily backed up by data. I'm going to defend people if they're making a solid point that is backed up by data. My only goal here is, as everybody's talking, can we pull out the pieces that will make sense as a common ground that we can all stand on by the end of the episode? We're going to see if this works, but I think the discussion is certainly overdue, and I think we've got a really good team to do it. So let's start here. There's a reason why we don't get along. I think too often in our party, we kind of skip past this. We just say from the stage, hey, everybody just needs to work together. And that's true. But for, 10, 20 years, we've hated each other. And that just doesn't go away because you snap your fingers. And so for this first topic, I really want to ask each of our panelists, why are you sometimes frustrated or even mad? What has led to that? Well, air your grievances, air your frustrations, not just from you, but from that group that you tend to represent as part of this discussion. What's caused you to be so frustrated? And I'm sure you're going to jump all over to see who gets to go first. Go ahead, anybody who wants to.
Well, I was going to say, I grew up in Hamilton County, Southern Illinois. When I was in high school, dominated by Democrats. I think all our countywides were, Democrats except sheriff. We had 2 Democrat state reps, 2 Democrat state senators. And, we were just always taking it on the chin cycle after cycle. But now that county, in this last election, 85% of them voted for President Trump. It was the 5th highest Trump vote in the state. All our countywides are Republicans, 2 Republican state reps, 2 Republican state senators. Now I live in St. Clair County, similar dynamic where, historically it's been dominated by Democrats. Now it's a very tight margin, 51-49. We're duking it out. We're making progress cycle after cycle. So I've been called every name in the book, right? Sometimes I get called a rhino at 10 a.m. and a fascist at 3 p.m. And it's like, this is just crazy. And that's one of the things that aggravates me, is that it seems like on our side of the aisle, especially like the last, I would say, 4 years, it has been very label driven, where it's like, well, this person's a rhino, this person's a conservative, this person's, an America First patriot. And when you put people in boxes like that and just keep dividing the Republican Party more and more and more, then we get in this. That's, I think, part of the reason why we're in the situation that we're in today.
Fair thought. Who else's thoughts?
So I think I have the honor of being the youngest panelist. I'm 23. So some of this stuff's been going on since I was in diapers. So what I've seen,
it's been going on longer than just 2 years, Collin. So I don't know what you're talking about there.
Fair, valid. What I've seen is this idea. Well, first of all, the establishment thing. I think establishment versus grassroots is more of a way of thought than a existence in public office. I mean, I think you can absolutely be elected for 3 or 4 terms and not be the establishment. I think it's a way of thought or a way of approach more than anything. But to me, I know our biggest gripe and my biggest gripe is over the last few years, we have continued to go downward in our representation and not recognize that a lot of times, to me, it's a result of operating out of fear. I think that we shy away, we tiptoe and tap dance around things, and we accept previous norms and previous status quos as law, or as necessities and campaigning, or necessities and stances, whatever it may be. And, it's a new age of politics, and our party would do well to wake up and realize not only what time it is in America, but what time it is in campaign approaches. And I know we're going to discuss a lot of that stuff today on what those kinds of ideas are. But we, as a Freedom Caucus and as myself, I mean, we want principled people. We want real fighters, people that are standing on principle, looking forward. And I think we see a lot of this discourse because there are people that are afraid to change anything, afraid to give anything a shot. For heaven's sakes, maybe we should do something different than what we've done that's lost us 11 seats in the last 10 years in the House. So, that's sort of my overview, and I know we're going to get into specifics later.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Well, taking a leap on Darren Bailey certainly didn't do so well in 2022.
Hey, hold on. The rule is no rebuttals. Come on.
The bottom line here is that Republicans have a primary voter problem. That primary voters don't know what they want. And what they want, seemingly by the results of statewide primaries in recent years, shows that they want candidates to win primaries that cannot win general elections. The party is missing the boat in nominating candidates who can win. Love him or hate him, Bruce Rauner was a terrible governor. He won the primary because he ran a primary campaign that appealed enough to the right and didn't scare away the center that he won in 2014. Mark Kirk cleared the field in 2010 in the primary and was able to win against a flawed candidate in the general election that year when the conservative Republican for governor lost that race to a guy that never should have. I mean, Pat Quinn should have had a chance to win re-election in 2010 in Illinois in a Republican wave, and the conservatives still lost the race. It's not necessarily conservative versus moderate, but Republican primary voters think we need to pick the rightest of the right to be the most pure person we can find on the ballot in November. That person does not play in DuPage County. That person does not play in
Patrick,
Lake County.
We're going to get into a lot of this, but leave it to the podcast host and himself to just change the agenda item. The question here is what frustrates you? I mean, you've confided in me. You've said
Republican primary voters frustrate me. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, because we'll get into the data, we'll get into the specifics in the next couple topics here. But I just really, for you as a moderate, as somebody who has said to hell with the Republican Party, but the question is why have you gotten to that point? And it sounds
the Republican Party said to hell with me because I stood against Donald Trump and that BS for the last 10 years. But the reality here is that you want to talk about the problems Republicans have winning elections, and it comes down to primary voters who don't have the interest of winning at heart. And that's where things need to change.
Okay, appreciate it. And thanks for your patience as I push you back. We're going to get into all of the other stuff you brought up very soon. But I think here it's just, we're all to different levels frustrated, and rightfully so. And I want to hear that, and our audience wants to hear that. If they're going to know you represent them, they got to know you hold their feelings and frustrations too.
Next.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can I start, or do you want to go, Leslie? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say that for the past 20 years, the Illinois GOP has been in a complete disarray. And that is because we are playing this purple playing playbook that has made our entire party into mush. We don't have any strong leaders. And for any corporation or organization to be strong, you need strong leaders. And what we see is our leaders taking money from Democrats, kowtowing to the Democrats, and pretty much that says we are negotiable and that we surrender to be controlled opposition. And then that gives the left the narrative to then be able to say that even Republicans don't believe in their conservative policies, right? And so that doesn't do anything to energize the base, to make people want to go, the grassroots, you can call them, but the grassroots really is the voters. That doesn't energize any of the voters to support, to give donations, to go knock on doors, let alone compel people to vote. And when somebody stands up with actually Republican ABC values, conservative values, the swamp resents it, because what it does is it puts a big light on their establishment swamp and shows how they stand for absolutely nothing. And then when someone stands up, when they stand up, you get bopped at when you stand up. Well, the swamp, establishment swamp, doesn't stand for anything, and they don't want to get bopped at because they want to continue wearing their name tag, getting their paycheck, and this isn't helping us move the needle to the right whatsoever. So what we need to do is, I am right. I tell you why I'm right, why I'm mad, make you aware of these reasons, what I stand for. You agree with that, so you vote right. I be red, you be blue. This purple nonsense playbook is causing apathy in our party, and the Republicans can keep playing like this, but they're going to continue to lose.
Stevens brought the heat. I think she threw the gauntlet down for the rest of you, but playing nice. Leslie, go ahead.
Okay, well, I agree with bits and pieces of a lot of what everyone has said so far. But for me, the thing that frustrates me the most, particularly since I came from private sector business, where we would have big discussions about what our plans were and everybody would put their ideas in. And at the end of the day, we would all get on board and we would go work together to do it. And the thing that has been frustrating to me is I look at our party and I see us lose and lose and lose, and we don't adjust. We just double down and get more disunified, and really it's take an all or nothing approach. And I think we've seen this in a lot of our elections, where if somebody supports someone who isn't the most ultra conservative in an election, then you're automatically a rhino and you can't be counted on for something else. And so the thing is, especially having been in government where we had some Republicans in government at the time when, like them or not, Governor Rauner was in office, at least it was better than having Pritzker. If we would have had Rauner in office instead of Pritzker, we would have had control of the maps. We would have been in a better position, but we never see past the longer term of it. So my biggest frustration is the all or nothing. People forget that if you don't win, you cannot impact policy and you cannot have a chance to govern. And we double down on policies or on ideologies, and we don't think about how to win.
Yep. And Leslie, that's part of been my frustration, just coming over to politics and to the party. I come from the real world. I come from business like you. And I look at all this drama and infighting, and I'm like, seriously, guys, like in business, you just all would be fired. You all would be fired, and we would start over fresh. Every single one of you would be without a job tomorrow because you can't get the job done. That's the reality of the real world. Yet here we are in politics, 20 years of sniping at each other. The players seem to be almost the same, and we're still just all sniping at each other. So I definitely share that frustration. Chris, what do you got, buddy?
So look, I don't fit into very many boxes here. As you said in the intro, Collin, I lean to the center, sometimes even on the left, because I didn't come from the Republican Party. As some of you know, I came from working on the other side of politics for a while before I started working full-time in Republican Party service, okay? And what frustrates me more than anything is that the Republican Party at one time in this state was a serious political organization. It controlled constitutional offices. It controlled the state Senate all the way up until the 2000s. It controlled it controlled more seats in the congressional delegation than it does now. And yet, with 26 years uninterrupted in the governor's mansion, of course, but what frustrates me now it's a joke. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have anything. And we can all blame maps here and say the Democrats are drawing the maps. Why can't we win elections? But the Democrats drew the maps in 2000. The Democrats drew the maps in 2010, and we were doing better then. And obviously, the Republican Party's lost a lot of ground in those times, but they were doing better then. They were able to pick up seats. They were able to be competitive in different areas. They weren't even competitive at all in many downstate areas that Butler were talking about earlier when these maps were drawn back then. And those areas are now deeply Republican. I think the main problem that frustrates me in the modern era of the Republican Party is that there's no campaigning. The Republican Party campaign infrastructure is run off of vibes. That we're just going to post on social media. We're going to get everybody up in a tizzy. We're going to talk about how much the Democrats are terrible, but we're not doing mail. We're not doing digital. We're not up on TV. Despite the fact that there's more of a grassroots presence in the Republican Party, we're not actually running real field programs. We're not knocking on doors. We're not phone banking. We're not text banking. We're not doing any of these things. We're just riding with the vibes. We're riding off of this insane idea that the people of Illinois are just waking up. One day it'll come. One day the city of Chicago is just going to vote Republican because things have gotten so bad. But those days are never coming. And yes, marginally, things are changing, but it has nothing to do with anything the Republican Party has done in this state. It's because of Donald Trump. And Pfingsten might not agree with that, and that's fine. But because Donald Trump moved a number of voters to the Republican Party that weren't there otherwise. That's why Hamilton County, that Butler talks about, it was trending red forever. It was going to be countywide Republicans and state reps in that area anyway if you didn't do anything. And the other problem is that there's no infrastructure. There's no party. There's these township organizations that have meetings every month, and they don't actually go out and knock on doors. They don't actually engage with the voters. They don't actually have a presence in their community. Why are all these townships going blue? It's not just because the Democrats are voting overwhelmingly by mail. That's part of the problem, of course. But it's also because these township organizations get complacent and they don't do anything. They just talk about, well, we're going to do the same thing we've done all these years, and nothing ever gets accomplished. And that's not a conservative problem. That's not a moderate problem. That is a party problem that can't happen. And finally, as part of my airing of grievances, so to speak, it's the fact that the Republican Party is a joke. In no serious political party in recorded history would failed statewide and congressional candidates have a stranglehold from Facebook, their online newspapers, to say this is what the Republican Party should be, and everybody's going to like it. It's going to get play in the media because so-and-so said something on Facebook, guys. We need to pay attention to this. So-and-so wrote an article about this candidate. No serious political party functions this way. No serious political party cares about what's being said about them in two-bit newspapers or on Facebook pages. That's the problem with the Republican Party. The Republican Party has lost track of how to actually win elections. There's no campaigns, there's no infrastructure, and we're out chasing the ball down the street instead of actually taking the fight to the Democrats, which is the point of partisan politics.
Chris brought the heat too. I like it. And by the way, if you're watching this, there was a rule, only one rule for our panelists, and it was at this topic that you're not allowed to rebut. So there were things that each of our panelists said that I'm sure the rest really wanted to respond to, but that was the rule for just this one topic. As you move forward, now we'll start to rebut. But for us to be able to air grievances, you can't be worried about what you're going to say, then the next person is going to say you're an idiot. So just during this topic, we're letting each person raise their grievances. I want to add to what you guys all said, because there are essentially two splits in our party. There's a split on ideology between conservative and moderate. And there's a split on, I don't even know what to call it, between grassroots and establishment. And between those splits, each side has a reason to be frustrated. I've been watching politics in Illinois for almost 20 years. And I got to tell you, thank God I also get to do politics nationwide more and more lately, because I keep saying this, y'all suck in Illinois. And so it's kind of nice to get out of Illinois and get a breath of fresh air in the other 49 states. We don't see this in other states. But here in Illinois, you see each of these groups, I'm going to talk about it. Conservatives, they've been blamed for everything that's gone wrong in the party for the last 20 years. Every time we lose, someone out there is like, well, it's the conservatives' fault. Every time. I could understand why conservatives are frustrated, because nonstop, it's always their fault anytime we lose in Illinois. Moderates, I get why they're frustrated, because no matter what they do, they're constantly called names, called rhinos, said they shouldn't be part of the party. Why would you want to be part of a party that doesn't even want you in the first place? I think that was Pfingsten's point. Between the grassroots and the establishment, I get why the grassroots is frustrated. They do the vast majority of the work in the party, and yet they're ignored most of the time. They're rarely given a seat at the table. They're disrespected publicly and privately. I understand why they're frustrated. And on the establishment side, you've got people who have given their lives to the Republican Party for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and suddenly now they're being misrepresented as a problem just because they happen to have dedicated so much of their lives to helping the party, the state, the community, whatever it might be. Each group has a reason, a valid reason for being frustrated. And that's what we want to make sure is pointed out here, that everybody has a valid reason for being frustrated. We've aired that out. Now let's start to talk about the why and how do we resolve it. So here's our next agenda topic, and now the gloves are off. Y'all can respond to each other, though of course I'll keep it respectful. But with everything that was just said, here's my question to each of you: why do we treat each other so badly? As I said, I've seen this in other states, and yeah, there's some splits, there's some disagreements, but they don't treat each other like we do in this party. You go on Facebook for 5 minutes, and 20 different Republicans over here are ripping on 20 different Republicans over there. And then the next morning, it's this group ripping on that group. Like we treat each other horribly. Why is that, do you guys think?
I would attribute it to a form of class warfare. I'm from a very rural county downstate, 78% Trump County last time around, live in the suburbs now, after many years in the Champaign area. I think it's a lot of it is the conservative, is the grassroots working class part of the party that looks at the business types, the suburban North Shore types that write the checks as not pure enough, not good enough, because they don't do the work. And that's what I think fuels that rhino versus I'm a good old down home boy sort of thing that you've seen divide the state for so long. And that's a problem the state's going to have forever, right? It's such a big, diverse state. And the tent is always going to have so many different factions, no matter what, right? I mean, what's the old saying? The line of the northern border of Illinois is on line with Boston, and the southern border is on the line with Richmond, Virginia, right? I mean, it's a state that is essentially both Yankee and Confederate, and it is a big messy beast, and the cultures couldn't be more different. And I think that fuels a lot of the grassroots far right versus the seeming suburban squishy moderates.
I think the one thing that I want to, make clear as we're doing this is I see those as two different splits, and too often by combining them we cause problems. I see establishment and grassroots is one split, and conservative moderate is another. Sometimes we squish those together, which makes it really hard for people to follow, and now we're just hating on each other. So that's part of the reason why I want to keep those two separate, because I don't think you can be establishment and be Northern Illinois, Southern Illinois, poor, rich, donor, grassroots. So I think we keep those separate. But I would say, Patrick, what you just said sounds reasonable to me. Is the inverse also true, though? I mean, Collin, Kristina, is the inverse true, where the donor class, the more wealthy suburban, I say maybe establishment, they tend to look down on grassroots, whether it's the people who do the work or the candidates that you guys tend to back. I would imagine you guys feel like you're looked down on too, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think that's been felt in some cases, and in other cases, people embrace it. I mean, think about guys like Marty McLaughlin. I mean, a Barrington, successful business person, wealthy man that has nothing but respect for conservatives and the Freedom Caucus and grassroots people. And there are others. There's too many to name them. I don't want to offend anybody by not naming them. But I think ultimately speaking, there are some that do and some that don't. Probably overall, the answer is probably yes. But I think the divide is maybe something other than that too. And Kristina kind of got to this in her opening, but I think part of the problem is you've got personalities that simply don't mesh. And when you're in a chamber together for a long time or in leadership, a lot of this problem is that people just simply hate each other. And so that boils over into the public sphere instead of keeping it inside. But the other problem I see is a threatening of power. I think that a lot of this boils back to we have a failure to check our egos at the door, and we take everything personally. and it becomes about power and control. That to me goes to the heart of why we can't win. I think it goes to the heart of leadership, all of the above. So we don't get along for a lot of reasons. Personality conflicts, we simply hate each other. Power is threatened by new ideas and new opportunities. And I think for a long time, people got used to not having a magnifying glass on them. I don't remember, and I've talked to folks that are older than me that, this didn't used to be as public of a deal whenever we had a state central committeeman argument, or we had a inside the house argument. But today it's not like that. And I think people are threatened by public input on what used to be private discourse, but maybe it's for the good. I think in some cases it could be for the good. So I think that's what some of this not being able to get along stuff. And suppose maybe you have this third tier of people that genuinely believe that their ideas are better and they care so deeply about the future of our party and our state that they're passionately disagreeing. And I think those people maybe are a whole different sector of our party.
I mean, certainly that's the group that I respect, and I give kudos as much as possible in our podcast, because there are plenty of people, well-meaning people, just like that on all sides of these splits. But you're certainly not wrong when it comes to egos, Collin, because that's been a thing for 20 years. Every time I see somebody start to pop up, show some promise, they're getting people excited, they're winning some elections, and they go, ooh, I could be king or queen. And then, the ego gets in and then it drops. And then we just keep doing that. And at the end of the day, I will use Leslie, your county chairman up in Lake County, Keith Brinn. He always likes to say, great, you're king of who gives a shit. I mean, that's basically what it is. Like you're king of what? Your tiny little fiefdom in a state where we're in the super minority and don't actually matter. Like, I definitely think ego is a significant problem. So you're right on that. Who else has thoughts on why we just can't get along, why we treat each other so badly?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people are fighting over, being the most important Republican in a state where being a Republican is irrelevant, right? We have no statewide offices. We only have 3 members in the congressional delegation, 40 members in the House, 19 in the Senate. It's just, it's been status quo. It's been stagnant. There's been no upward movement where, state senators are running for Congress or congressmen are running for governor or anything like that. So everybody's just fighting over these bottom 3 or 4 rungs on the ladder and having these, pissing contests where it's like, well, I'm more conservative than you and you're a rhino and this person's establishment. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to swap you out for this person, and then we're still going to have 40 members. At the end of the day, what does that accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, I love when I go up and help our clients in Connecticut, and I'm considered a conservative. I'm a right-winger to them. Then I go down and help our clients in Texas, and I'm a moderate. I'm a rhino to them. So I get your point. I mean, we certainly are a dynamic party for sure.
Look, I think the reason why the Republican Party treats each other so poorly in the state is because there hasn't been any victory. There hasn't been anything to unify around. The last major victory for the Illinois Republican Party in this state was like the progressive tax, but like nobody like saying kumbaya after the progressive tax failed. Like that's not what happened.
It's Rauner and Topinka. That's the real
right. That's where I'm going with
victory.
That's where I'm going with this, Patrick. Because like the last time that happened was Rauner and Topinka. Rauner obviously was a disaster. So ever since then, it's just been
poor Leslie. Every time you guys keep saying that.
Well, he was, but like that's what breeds all this dissent is you have loss after loss after loss after loss. There's no good news anymore for the Illinois Republican Party. The good news of the 2024 cycle is that Trump did better than anybody since Leslie over here did in 2016. That was a good night for the Illinois Republican Party. But up and down the ballot, it was like, oh, you broke even in the House, you broke even in the Senate. Everyone starts pointing fingers at each other because there was no victories to actually come out of it. You can't point to anything. So I think if the Republican Party was successful in some degree and actually had the spoils of victory to divide amongst the new lands that it perhaps had conquered, then yeah, we might be able to get along. We might be able to go back to doing things a little bit behind closed doors. But when all you have to talk about is negative, 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 of course we're going to treat each other badly. There's no positive news if you're the Illinois Republican Party. There's no good news. Well, there is good news, but it's nothing that anybody really wants to talk about. And we'll talk about it later.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, there's an entrepreneur I mentor who in the business world talks about abundance mentality. He talks about it all the time. Drives me a little crazy, I'm not going to lie, but he's not wrong some of the times where your mentality drives, what you do. And for a long time, we haven't had that kind of mentality as a party, a positive mentality, one of winning. It's just been this downward spiral. So, Chris, I think you make a valid point. Let's let Leslie jump in. I know you've been wanting to jump in here.
Well, I was going to say that I think part of the discourse these days has been so negative because no one really listens to anyone anymore. They just sort of get in your own pod and you shout it louder and louder, whether it's on Facebook or on Instagram or in the printed, online newsletters that, we all get. And no one listens to each other and is proactive about trying to find common ground. And I think, we could all take a lesson from what is happening at a federal level, like him or not. Trump, and I actually happen to like him, but because he's a business guy and he's applying business principles to what is going on at a government level. He is bringing people together toward a goal of his big thing, making America better, but it's financial stability and improvements. It's listening to what people want and doing what they want instead of what the insiders want, et cetera. Somebody earlier mentioned a lack of a clear message is completely correct. No one, if you ask a Republican, what Republican Party stands for, I think we'd all be hard pressed if we look at where we are in the state to say, this is what we stand for. I can say what I stand for. And the thing that I notice is that we have so many people who are saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And no one asks the voters, what is it you want that you're missing? And with our target audience in mind, which is really the voters of the state. And as a result of this, we're in this doom loop where we're just shouting at each other. We're not listening. We're not being solution oriented. We're not getting to a discussion where it is, how can we start winning? And I will just tell, everyone, having run statewide, having been in government, living in Northern Illinois I live in Lincolnshire. I've lived here for 31 years. When we moved here, John and I, this is a pretty red area, at least moderate Republicans and some decent hardcore. It is hard for us to find. We're hard pressed to find Republicans up here anymore. We skip a lot of doors before we get to the next door. The electorate in Illinois is changing. And I guess the last thing I would just mention on this is there's three numbers, and this is from the 2022 election. I'm sure these will be slightly different after the one that we just went through, but the numbers are 47, 33, and 20. And 47 is the percent of people in the state as of the end of 22 that said they were Democrats. 33 are the number of people who claim to be Republicans, and 20% are the number who claim to be independents. And that's just numbers, and it's just math, that if we only focus on ourselves, and as Republicans, the hardcore, the hard R's, the moderate R's, we still come up with 33%, or maybe 38% now because of the Trump effect in the state. But we're not going to get over 50, and without having a broader look at all this and listening to a breadth of ideas, we are never going to get to a point where we can win and get over the 50% mark.
Well, first of all, I think there are a couple of online newsletters that are pretty decent, if you ask me. But the other thing I would say is you're right in not knowing what voters want, because, and Collin and I have talked about this, Republican primary voters aren't what they used to be, right? I use the example of 2012 primary voters when I would go around to Central Illinois events working with my candidates, and it would be the traditional Republican issues that they wanted to talk about: guns, abortion, low taxes, right? Those were the issues. By the time 2020 rolled around, Collin and I worked on this race together, a congressional race downstate, a lot of Southern Illinois. The issue that primary voters wanted to talk about was, will you lay down your life for Donald Trump? That's the whole Republican Party today is, are you all in for Donald Trump? That's it. That's all the Republican Party believes in anymore. And until the state party is able to change its message and get voters to believe that there's something other than the big orange guy at the end of the tunnel, and get back to a party that believes in something, because I don't know what the hell y'all believe in anymore. Until there's a party that believes in something, you're going to continue to lose.
Colin, are we both on the same topic here?
Real quick, just one clarifying point. On my podcast, I'm Collin, so Collin Moseley, you're going to be Moseley. I saw when he kept saying Collin, you kept trying to point to me, so everyone knew it wasn't you. So I'll clarify that for you. You're Moseley for today. Yeah, and we're going to talk about some of those topics. We're going to talk Trump. We're going to talk messaging. Those are going to be some of our upcoming topics. We will definitely get into those. Here, just let's stay on this point of why can't we get along. Chris and or Kristina, if you guys have thoughts, jump on in.
I already went, so
okay. I just saw you trying to jump in before, so I was making sure you had a chance if you wanted.
I was just making sure we were on the same topics.
Got it. All right. Kristina, if you've got thoughts on this, otherwise we'll take us to the next topic. Just note you are muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Kristina, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I have kids in this house, and they're, I don't want you guys to hear if they come knocking and stuff.
Hey, we're family friendly. It's all right. But go for it.
A 3 and a 6-year-old. So yeah. But so I think that because of we blurred the line between red and blue now, and we really don't even know what we are, and that the establishment and people in our town that wear these name tags and are in political positions, they're not getting anything done. So it takes voices like me, who doesn't have a name tag, who's just a mom, and my friends who came along noticing that we get things done and we fight for things and we stand for things and we raise money for candidates here in the Republican Party, doing what the establishment and the GOP should be doing. We resent that. And I think that the establishment resents that as well. And so, it's just because people aren't doing their jobs and getting things done that now kind of the grassroots has to fight for things because people are scared to stand for anything and they're too busy playing purple. And that's what it is. And it's a shame. And the thing is that you're kind of blurring the lines between, that people can't be establishment-y or they can't really be grassrootsy. Well, I mean, I would say I'm kind of both. I don't really like being put into pockets because, depending on who's the best person, it's always going to be who wins the primary and is against that Democrat. It's the lesser of both evils. And I have worked on numerous campaigns and donated to people that maybe aren't as far right as I'd like them to be, but I'd rather that than the alternative, right? And there's a lot of people in the grassroots as well that are willing to give money to people, establishment-y, grassroots, whatever you want to put them in bucket-wise, but they just don't really stand for anything and do anything, and they're not going to give them money because of that and support them. So I think this is just this purple playing playbook has ruined the party. Is what I
that's a good transition to our next topic. And Leslie, I think that this next topic will get what you're trying to say, because I think it's going to launch right into it. Because our next topic is that split. We're going to go right at that split because for the longest time in our party, the split was really conservative versus moderate. We didn't really see this other split. It's only been in the last 4 to 6 years we've seen this new split emerge, and it doesn't make as much sense to people. Conservative versus moderate, I get why people wouldn't necessarily get along because we don't agree on ideology. You're here, I'm there. Okay, I get why maybe we don't get along. And so you don't have to define that split. We get it. It's easier to understand. The grassroots versus establishment split is one that has a number of people confused. And so that's really what I want to focus on with this next topic is why is there so much of a split between the establishment and grassroots? And I know, Kristina, you did kind of get into it a little bit. So if somebody just jumped to this point, maybe rewind a minute or two and listen to what Kristina just said. But let's talk about why there is this split between establishment and grassroots. Leslie, I know you really wanted to jump in as a response before, so I want to let you go first here.
Well, I was actually going to make a slightly different point, but it might be relevant here. And it has to do with hearing some discussion about, well, the Republicans used to stand for guns and abortion and blah, 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 and now we're too purple, et cetera. And I think if we could get to a point as a party, and this is maybe where the establishment has failed to lead us to. And so I think, maybe that gets us to the establishment point, a party where we find there are common needs. And I will tell you that If you take all these things that we believe in as Republicans, we take it up a level to a why is this important to me? You get to things like, I want an Illinois that is affordable enough to live in. And so I'm concerned about the amount of our taxes and good jobs here. I want an Illinois where my children are safe and I can afford to like have them here. And so you get to the importance of family and education and the kids. And I want an Illinois where I have the freedom to do what I want and I have leaders who are actually representing me and not the people who are funding them. You get to higher levels that you can talk to people who maybe don't think of themselves as Republicans, but actually would say, but I agree with that. And you can get them to come to your side because at the end of the day, why do we care about guns? We care because it's a Second Amendment right so that we can preserve our freedoms. You know, why do we care about the First Amendment? And why do we care about some of the things that are going on in education? Because we're concerned about what's happening to our children. If we keep it at a low level and just talk about a policy, we don't get to the need that is important, that drives people to why those are important. We'll never get together. But if we can kick it up to a higher level, we can start to make connections across our party. I think that our people are frustrated with the establishment. I personally, even though I'm the establishment person on this group, I'm personally frustrated with it because I think things going on in the state central committee that I want to pull my hair out. And I know that there are people there who are more, you know, certain people anyway, are more cared about staying in power than doing the right thing and trying to get on a message where we could all have a common ground. I understand the frustration of the grassroots. I knock on doors. I tell people what I hear when I knock on doors. No one seems to change what we're doing. And so to me, a lot of our problems between grassroots and establishments goes back to people who are leading us are, you know, I think then just maybe something that we haven't really mentioned overtly, but it's just a fact. When you keep losing, it is really hard to raise money. When you can't raise money, you have no money to help fund staff, surveys, grassroots efforts, vote by mail efforts, you know, all this other stuff that we need money for. And there becomes then the importance of catering to some of the heavy duty funders that at least will chip in some money when no one else will. And so it's tough being in all of these roles. I know I've been frustrated when I hear some people who are in grassroots, and I think, you know, people here who are representing leadership in groups are a little different, but somebody who's just a precinct committeeman who's yelling about this and that and can't understand why Kathy Salvi can't call them back. You know, I'm just like, well, have you tried talking to your township chairman yet? And like maybe running it up the flagpole like you would in a normal organization. So I think the overall level of frustration from losing and the fact that cannot seem to get on a common message, which I actually truly believe. I spent my business career in brand marketing. There's a level where we can all connect, where we have friends who are Democrats. I have friends who are Democrats who voted for me. They voted for me because I ran on things that we knew we had common beliefs about, and it wasn't on guns and abortion. It was on a much higher level about the importance of safety in our families and what we want to have in our communities.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dissect that point for sure. But I think something you said that's really telling and really helpful, because Kristina said it also just before we got to this topic, was, yeah, I can understand some frustration from the grassroots because there is a bit of a mentality amongst the establishment types who do tend to be a little condescending to the grassroots when it isn't earned. I mean, we're not winning in this state. And so the grassroots immediately says, hey, you're not winning. So why are you telling me what to do when you just keep losing? And so I do understand that sort of frustration of like, no one on this podcast, and you guys are all humble and that's why I love you all, but like no one that we represent has any right in this state to be cocky at any level. We are all losing. None of us have the right to look down on anybody else because we're all losers at this point. So I think that's part of the challenge here, though. The grassroots looks at that establishment group and says, okay, you're all in leadership, you're all in power, and you're not winning. So stop telling me I'm doing things wrong. The flip side, though, is also true. The establishment says, listen, people like you mentioned, Kathy Salvi, there's others who've been in leadership. They're in leadership for like 5 minutes, and then suddenly already the grassroots is attacking them. And I was like, well, you haven't even given them a chance yet. So don't attack them yet. Let them try first, and then let's see if they succeed or don't succeed. But there's sort of that automatic, you know, Paul Ryan was the Tea Party darling until suddenly he was Speaker of the House. Now he's evil establishment. We just sort of flip a switch without even letting them try to see if they could get something done. So again, it's a situation where both sides have reasons to have grievances, but both sides also are a little bit wrong here, and we got to have the humility to admit it. kudos to you, Leslie, for admitting it. You said where there were some mistakes and some failures on the side of the establishment. It's the first time we've heard someone do that on this podcast. So you get the humility award, and I appreciate you doing that. But who else has thoughts on this, on the split between grassroots and establishment?
Well, I'm going. My vein of thinking is pretty much where we're at right now, and I agree with Leslie for bringing it up. From our perspective, right, in the Freedom Caucus, I think we've seen this disagreement because people that have been in charge for the last however long are losing. But yet, when we come forward with different ideas, different strategies, different people, we are Satan themselves, get put in small offices, get the crap kicked out of us, and the office stuff is what it is. Whatever, it's petty politics. No wonder we can't win. But the reality is, we've seen this for time after time. Failed, second place Olympian leadership continuing to scrape and beg for 2 more years or 4 more years at a shot to make it better. And the question I think that exists then, here's the question: how long do people deserve a second chance or a third chance or a fourth chance before it's time to try something different? And when I say that, Patrick, I don't just mean Darren Bailey, okay? I know you threw that at me earlier. I love Darren. He's a great man. I know him personally, and I was proud to work for him. But when I say that, what I mean is just people who organizationally and strategically think differently, maybe think a little bolder, and have some different ideas to implement and have resources maybe to put behind it. But we can't even get there because the regime that's in charge right now says, no, you go away. Or no, I got 2 more years. I got 4 more years. And that's not necessarily meant to be a personal slam at McCombie or anybody, but facts are facts. We let Jim Durkin run the House into the ground term after term. We let Tony not win us anything. So, that's the question, right? How long?
Moseley, let me ask you this, because you're making some good points, but here's my only pushback on this. The moment Don Tracy took over the party, it was minutes before he was already being attacked. The moment Kathy Salvi took over the party, it was minutes before she was attacked. Tony McCombie is the most conservative House Republican leader we've had in my lifetime. Not conservative enough for some, and I respect that. But it was minutes before she took over, before she was already getting attacked. So while I do concede that where there are failures, we should be willing to call them out. And I certainly think you're making some good points there. The problem is a lot of these people who are now establishment weren't even given a shot. And I think that's not fair.
Well, I think it's a far more granular issue. And I promise I won't hijack. Talk show host won't hijack your show here, I promise. But let me ask you a question. Moseley, Butler, Kristina, whoever. And I say this as a pro-gun, concealed carry holder, grew up on a farm with a shotgun and a rifle and a cabinet right when you walk in the back door. Can a Republican support an assault weapons ban? Can a Republican support universal background checks? And can a Republican support stronger red flag laws? Honest question.
To me, on its face, I think if any of those things have a chance of being counter to our Constitution, then I think the answer is no. If there's any question of constitutionality, then I think the answer is no. Now, for example, I think most Republicans probably agree that if somebody was convicted of murder, all conservatives probably agree. If you're a murderer, maybe there should be a layer of protection there.
Maybe.
But
come on now.
I'm just saying maybe because I don't speak for the 2 million voters in Illinois. But the question of constitutionality is where it's at for me. If there's any implication that this stuff's going to end up in the courts, I think it looks really bad for a Republican to be on the roll call for a anti-Second Amendment vote that's judicially questionable.
I think I point to Ed Sullivan, former state representative, was very conservative, but had his detractors. He's the lobbyist for the Illinois State Rifle Association, and he's the guy trying to get both sides to sit at the table saying, okay, you know what? The law-abiding gun owners are willing to accept some things that you guys want. Let's sit at a table. Let's find some commonality. Unfortunately, in this state, the left has no interest. They just want to take away the guns, period. So I think there's one of intent, too. So, Collin, I want to back you up, but kind of emphasize your point here, which is there's also one of intent. If it's a far-left lawmaker in the state who's just trying to use this law to get at all the guns eventually, that's their goal, okay, then you don't have to stand for that. But, Patrick, to your point, point, I know plenty of super conservative Republicans who would say, you know what, background checks make a lot of sense. Certain restrictions make a lot of sense. To me, they're still a Republican. Just because they happen to have a little bit of a difference of opinion on the margins, they still believe in the Second Amendment, but they have a difference of opinion on the margins. We can't be kicking people like that out of the party just because they come from a different perspective. Because again, we're a giant state. As Leslie said, as others have said, we're a massive state. An opinion on guns in the Northwest suburbs is different than an opinion on guns in the South suburbs. Just like me and my wife have very different opinions on that, because I grew up in the super safe Northwest suburbs. She grew up in the South suburbs, where every week they'd hear about one of her friends who got shot over the weekend. We're going to have a difference of opinion on guns.
Look, I think we're moving off the grassroots establishment divide here, so I want to get back to that. The thing about the grassroots establishment divide isn't necessarily in terms of ideology; it's in terms of tactics. And the problem is that you have a grassroots which increasingly
It's entirely about ideology.
No. That's the conservative moderate split. Okay, establishment and grassroots is a tactical.
Chris is making a good point.
Is a tactical disagreement, and as such, there is the grassroots, which is perhaps more conservative and overwhelmingly conservative. Perhaps there is a sense of entitlement within the grassroots that the Lord Almighty Republican establishment should bestow upon them the spoils of their coffers, which are very depleted, of course, but that because the grassroots has propelled a candidate to victory in some primary, that it is the establishment which needs to bankroll them to some sort of victory. I was there at the great Bolingbroke Circus of 2022 after that election, when everybody showed up to complain to the state central committee that nothing got accomplished. Why weren't you, Rhino, supporting Darren Bailey? Where's the money? Why weren't you giving us millions of dollars? You're the party. So there's a sense of entitlement within the grassroots. And on the establishment side, there's a sense of stubbornness that who are these people to come in here and tell us, the wise leadership of the Illinois Republican Party, who are these people to tell us what we are supposed to do to run the Republican Party? So the establishment's stubborn. They're not willing to budge really much because they've been doing, these people, we got Bruce Rauner elected in 2014. We know what we're doing, guys. We got Mark Kirk elected in 2010. We know what we're doing, guys. So there's stubbornness there, but there's entitlement from the grassroots when it's not warranted, because did Darren Bailey deserve? Darren Bailey wasn't going to win. He was never going to win. I don't care how much money descended from the heavens from the Illinois State Republican Party. I don't care how great of a campaign you put together, because he didn't put together any campaign, but I don't care how good of a campaign you put together, you're not winning that race. So there's no sense of entitlement. Why should the party? Now, if you're someone like poor old Dan Brady, and you're like, listen, guys, maybe you guys should give me some money. Maybe he was entitled to some type of money in an open seat or something like that, but you're not entitled from the establishment to get money, and the establishment should be a little bit more fluid in how it fluctuates. But that's the real divide. The divide is entitlement versus stubbornness.
Chris, I think to your point about the sort of that entitlement portion, I'm not going to use names here, but there's somebody who on Facebook was railing against someone in the Republican Party. It was crazy. It was way out there, talking about something that they knew this person was doing X, Y, and Z. It was sexual and kind of weird. And when somebody questioned them on it, they said, God has granted me great discernment. So I know, because someone asked them, where's your facts? I go, God has granted me discernment. I know. So I go, okay, no. Where are your facts? These are super incendiary remarks you're making. If they're true, I mean, listen, I still have haters in this party. I still have enemies because I ran Gary Scoian out because he was caught with prostitutes in his basement. If the allegations are true, we need to move him out from our party. I'm the first to say that. But you can't just make these incendiary allegations and go, well, I know it's true because I think it's true. And I think that's part of that sort of that feeling you're talking about, Chris, that, you know what, we start with hatred of each other, and then we just look for reasons to hate each other instead of starting with, what are the facts? Okay, maybe that person isn't such an awful person, but we started hatred and then just look for excuses.
Can I also just add on this whole, there's been a lot of discussion about entitlement, et cetera. When I ran for office statewide, I got zero money from the state party. The notion from any grassroots or any candidate that the state party is going to fund you is just a misnomer. I mean, I don't know how they would have gotten it, because no one ever told me they were going to give me money to support me. They said they would help me. They give money if you're running for a state rep or something by helping you have a staff person to help you some portion of a part of a week. But they don't fund anything for you other than that.
They help out in a primary.
They don't
They
play.
get involved in primaries, and Patrick, they do. And I am very.
They literally in their bylaws
Second
don't.
Amendment, by the
They
way,
literally in their bylaws don't.
They don't. They don't.
They
It's
give money.
literally
They
in the
give-
policy
let's,
that they
let's
don't.
say this. We have a whole
No
topic
money.
on that. So let's have that fight when we get to that topic because it sounds like it'll be a juicy one. Go ahead, Leslie.
I was just going to say there's no money for that. They can barely afford the staff they have. The state leader, I think, Collin was mentioning the whole you're in office 5 minutes in a senior leadership position in the state and everybody's complaining at you like you're getting some big paycheck. This is all voluntary. You're spending your own money running all around the state. I had to do it myself when I was campaigning. You have to be everywhere because you're in charge. And then, and you're trying to do it and all you do is have people yelling at you. So it's a thankless job in many respects. And the grassroots, I sometimes think about it since I'm a parent, and I remember when my children would be begging me for something, and I would say, no, 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 and they would throw a tantrum. It's because I had different priorities about how we were going to spend that money that was more important for our family. And in some respects, the establishment in the state has had those. I heard Don Tracy speak once about they're there to fund the legal efforts to make sure that we have the lawyers in place to do vote challenging and to be able to help on election day. Some of the vote by mail efforts, certainly the Bank the Vote Gala that happened last spring helped to fund some of the efforts in vote by mail. So there are bigger all candidate things that the state party focuses on, and the grassroots want help for their individual candidate, which is already mentioned, may or may not be able to win. You have no idea what they're going to be able to do. It's really the local areas that are responsible for supporting that candidate and that candidate getting around to get the help and to get the donations because they're worth voting for. And I think there's a disconnect between the grassroots and establishment on that. The grassroots, the people I've talked to, even up here in our own township, think that the state party has all this money to give, and how come they're not supporting it? And they have zero. Our townships sometimes have more money than the state party.
Leslie, as a business person, wouldn't that come across to you then as we need a clear definition of who handles what, clear delineation, which should start at the top. Here's what I handle, here's what you handle. We should have an org chart, we should have responsibilities on paper. That would help clear some of this up. And that is a bit of a responsibility at the top. Maybe that's something we can take out of this that would really help. Kristina, I know you've been trying to jump in. Go ahead.
Oh, me trying to jump in?
No, it seemed like you were trying to jump in. I want to make sure you have a chance if you want to.
I'm okay.
Okay, we'll get you on this. I'm certainly on the state party.
Yeah,
one.
go ahead. I know there's a lot to cover, so
Yeah.
I want to make one brief. Go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say on this, divide between establishments and grassroots. I think if you look back to that primary in 2024, where it was Mike Bost versus Darren Bailey, that primary wasn't really a primary between, moderate and conservative. Both of those candidates are conservative. The primary there was very establishment versus grassroots. It was very based in approach, rhetoric, things of that nature. What kind, Mike Bost and Darren Bailey probably most likely wouldn't have had very many differences when it came to voting record if either of those individuals, if Darren had the opportunity to serve as a congressman. But the difference would have been Darren's approach and, kind of how he conducted himself. And Collin Moseley and I were on different sides of that for the most part. But at the end of the day, Mike won and, everybody gets on board. We make sure that Mike gets reelected. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I voted for Mike in the general. I mean, because look, where we live down here, it was over in the primary. And I think an interesting point on that race is you want to talk about a race that shows a perfect maybe divide and approach. What was it, 52-48? So, I mean, obviously, there's your perspective, right? Look how divided we truly are. The quick point that I wanted to make, too, just for perspective, is I think that this argument is different about the state party. It's different about like HRO, SRVF. Like there's different compartments in our party people have frustrations with. A House candidate probably maybe could care less about Kathy Salvi, but their gripe is with HRO. Or a Senate candidate could care less about Tony McCombie. Their gripe's with John Curran and his team or her team. I think there's different compartments here. People would like maybe some more winsome focuses or approaches with how we conduct House and Senate races versus a statewide race. Maybe there are some more nuances there.
Well, I think it definitely sounds like one of the solutions coming out of this discussion is a delineation of who handles what, what's our focus, who's in charge of what are we supposed to do? Because right now, I think we're spreading ourselves way too thin, and we don't have the resources or the manpower to be able to do that. So as we start to work towards some sort of a common sense solution to the problem, that certainly seems like a step in the right direction. I think another thing I'm hearing, which is something that I want to echo, which is a lot of this discussion is both two people can be right. I mean, as you guys are talking, it's like, well, she's right, he's right, he's right, she's right. Like, that's the problem here, is that it isn't an or situation. Well, only Kristina or Leslie can be right, or only Patrick or Moseley can be right. The idea is most of these problems, both are right. And I think that's what we need to recognize. We need both. We need both the establishment and the grassroots. We can't win without the energy and the ideas of the grassroots. We can't win without the experience and in many cases the financial connections for fundraising that come with the establishment. Together we could do some great things, but we have to be able to work together, respect each other, listen to each other, be at the same table together as equals. That's part of what we need to get better at, because we all bring something to the table. Somebody brand new to the party who's got energy brings something that a lot of us old fogies who've been around for forever just don't have. But those of us who've been around forever, we always hear the evil consultants who've been around. Well, guess what? We've made a lifetime. We've made it our number one mission to get as good at winning campaigns and elections as possible. That's not a bad thing. We do also need that in the party. I think we need to embrace experience and energy and new ideas. We need all of us if we're going to win. All right, let's go to the next topic. This one's definitely going to be a fun topic. So we got to talk Trump. Patrick already started to bring this up early on. I mentioned we're going to have a topic on this. This is a lot of you, as we were building up this agenda, and some of you, we asked you guys to give your questions and your agenda topics, and a lot of them had to do with this topic here of Trump. What do we do about this? Can a Republican be anti-Trump? Do you need to be pro-Trump to be part of this party? What is MAGA versus Rhino? How would you describe a MAGA conservative? There's just a lot we need to talk about here. So I'm going to pose it in one question, but you guys can take it any way you want. But my question is, can you be a Republican and also be anti-Trump? What's the answer to that question? And how would you describe somebody who's MAGA or not? Like, can we all coexist in the same party? That's my question to you all.
So I believe that you can be Republican and anti-Trump, because you need a broad coalition as a Republican Party, especially in this state. In this state, you need Republicans, quote unquote, who aren't as pro-Trump as the other ones, because there are conservatives, moderates in the suburbs who historically have voted Republican. They need a voice. And maybe it's not someone who's explicitly anti-Trump, but someone who isn't as pro-Trump as the rest of them. There is room, and Patrick's going to love me saying this, there is room within the tent of the Republican Party for Adam Kinzinger. There is. There is. But there is no room in leadership or in a controlling voice for the Republican Party for people like Adam Kinzinger, for people who are anti-Trump, because we live in Trump's Republican Party right now. We live in the party of populism, of economic nationalism. We live in the party of not bombing brown people in the Middle East every chance we get now. So if you believe that we should be doing the opposite of those things, and that's fine. That's okay. But you cannot be the controlling interest within the Republican Party. That cannot be the case. We cannot have people directly opposed to the ruling ideology of the Republican Party in charge of it. Now, if there are candidates in districts like the northwest suburbs of Cook County, even DuPage County, who by nature of them getting elected, they should probably be less attached to Trump and believe in things that aren't necessarily a part of the MAGA ideology, whatever that might mean, then yeah, they should have a voice in the Republican Party. Good luck getting through a primary, but they should have a voice and they should be listened to. But they shouldn't control the entire narrative of the Republican Party, because that's going to move you backwards to Mitt Romney losing. So no, we're not going to have.
And Chris, just to back up your point, I mean, I've had this in our SFR agendas, and I've wanted to get to it for a long time. Kinzinger did an interview with the Pantograph. I'm probably saying that wrong, whatever. Where he's flat out said he wants conservatives kicked out of what he would call a center-right Republican Party. He flat out said just wants them kicked out. And so I think to your point, Is there a space in our party for the Kinsingers or the Pat Bradys or whoever else? Yes, there absolutely is. But when they get in leadership, if they want a significant part of our party kicked out, then you don't get to be in leadership. Because if we're going to be a true big tent party, then that means you have to accept people who don't think like you and don't look like you. My problem with Kinzinger is not that he's moderate. It's that he wants to kick out a significant portion of our party. Well, then guess what, buddy? You're not a leader in our party. You don't get to be a leader. If your goal is to kick out a portion of our party, Chris, I think you make a fantastic point. Then you just don't get to be there. But if you're a moderate, Patrick, I think you're today's definition of a moderate, even though you aren't actually a moderate. There absolutely is a place in the party for people like Patrick. But if you say it's me and nobody else, well, then it's not you then.
I don't think so. This question for me is different because I think that there is a difference in wanting to be a Republican and, for example, endorsing Kamala Harris's America. It's one thing to be if you don't like Donald Trump as a person, okay, I'm not going to compel you to like anybody as a person. I don't think you can be a Republican and endorse Kamala Harris's vision for America. I don't think you can be a Republican right now and say that you are not on board with 90% of the America First agenda. That's where I think this problem is. If being anti-Trump as a Republican is the entire basis of your political identity, then you're bad for our party. Because if your goal is to be the person, like, for example, Jim Edgar, that Kamala Harris can, and I wish him the best of health, but that Kamala Harris can traipse out and say, look, this is a Republican former governor that endorses my vision for America, then no, you are not good for our party. But I think if you just don't like Donald Trump as a person, okay, whatever, but you can't be out there and leadership certainly, but I don't think you can be out there in the front lines saying this guy's terrible, his policies suck, XYZ, and still want to be a loud voice, a controlling voice in our party.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree.
Hold on. Pfingsten's head's going to explode. Let's let him go next.
No, please.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I'll go. I can go.
Go ahead, Kristina.
Okay, well, I was the Trump delegate, and so was my husband a Trump delegate. So we are a Trump house. I love Donald Trump, okay? I mean, 80% of Illinois primary he won, and he won the popular vote. And what I think is that for far too long, we have been led by party insiders that haven't been reflecting the will of the people. And you had Donald Trump stand up for the working class American citizen. Finally. And, look what came out of the insiders. I will never trust an anti-Trumper. Look at what came out of the insider uniparty, right? We have Paul Ryan. We have Mitt Romney. We have Liz Cheney. We have John McCain. Liz Cheney, she actively tried to throw the president in jail and then actively worked to elect Kamala Harris. And then John McCain rolled off his deathbed to completely bomb the healthcare bill. So no, if you are anti-Trump because you think he's mean man, and not pro-America and for, the will of the people, then I think you're either swampy, you're either think you're smarter than the base, or you have some other kind of alternative agenda.
Kristina, here's the problem with that. Because I hear what you're saying. The problem is Donald Trump himself lost Illinois by 9 points. If we're having a discussion about the national Republican Party, then I certainly get what you're saying. But if you
more people voted for Donald Trump than they did for the governor.
That is a straw man argument.
It's actually untrue. That's actually not accurate.
That is completely straw man because 2022 and 2024 are not the same
turnout. Patrick, hold on. Let me make the point here. So you go to the Republican Party of Florida's website. It's Trump everywhere on the images, and it should be because that's absolutely a pro-Trump state. You go to the Pennsylvania Republican Party's website. It isn't Trump's face everywhere. I think we have to understand that we've got to be a dynamic party. If you're talking nationally, okay, now I understand. Trump did win the popular vote nationally, but here our discussion is the Illinois Republican Party. And Trump lost Illinois by 9 points. Now, he did improve. I grant that absolutely. He absolutely improved his numbers, but he still lost by 9. And if we look at in 2026, the key districts that we need to play in to win in Illinois, I'm just looking at them right now. On the Senate side, the 4 holds, we need to just to hold ground. Trump lost by 3, lost by 9, lost by 2, lost by 7. And the House side, in the districts we want to hold on to, he lost 1 by 10, he lost 1 by 5, he lost 1 by 1. That's not even the pickups. I mean, look at the pickups, he lost by 5, 3, 13, 13, 10. These are the districts we're trying to play in to pick up seats. And so we have to be a dynamic Republican Party that understands that nationally, yeah, Trump won and he did awesome as a national party. In Illinois, there are significant portions of this state, especially in the suburbs, that if we want to play in, Trump doesn't play as well.
As a Republican Party. They were not doing a good enough job as a Republican Party then, is what I think. I just don't know how
after 10 years of Donald Trump, you're not going to change people's minds on how they feel about him. The reality is you either love him or you hate him. That's baked in.
Well, I think at the end of the day, like it's about addition, right? We have to get, people that support Trump, we need their votes. And then there are people who didn't support Trump. And if we're going to win some of these state rep districts or statewide, we need their votes as well. You can't be out there, as a Republican candidate for public office and do the kind of things that Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney did. They made their case. They had, a good 4 years of being on MSNBC and CNN and talking about how terrible Trump was. Even during that primary, they were doing it. And Republican primary voters said, no, we're sticking with Trump. He won every swing state. He's our president. And you can't being viscerally anti-Trump is not going to get you a victory.
But what we're not talking about here is, you guys keep going to the extreme examples, which I get. But we're not talking about the people who went out and endorsed Harris. I know this is where Patrick and I will disagree, but I agree with Collin Moseley, which is, like, I'm okay if you're not supportive of Trump. I don't have a problem with that. I think you still have a place in this party. If you go out in the general election and actively work for, raise money for, and endorse the Democrat, okay, we got a problem. I think we have to accept here that as a big tent party, there's going to be a lot of people who don't like Trump. I'm okay with that. We need to be a dynamic big tent party to win. But if you go in the general, endorse Kamala Harris, who's the most liberal, progressive candidate for governor or president we've ever seen, okay, now, yeah, I agree with Moseley. We got a problem. But there's a big delta between those two things. There's a lot of people. Listen, I live up here in the suburbs. There's a lot of Republicans, or in many cases, former Republicans, who their only beef with the party is they don't like Trump. And I want to welcome them back into the party. If your only issue with us is you don't like Trump, but you agree with most of his policies, you agree with all the Republican policies, you just don't like Trump, you still need to be a member of this party. The problem is, if we keep saying you're not allowed here because you don't like Trump, we're going to be a shrinking party, because I think there's a disconnect between people who don't live in the suburbs and those who do. As an example, you look at these districts. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. If we're going to win House District 51, Nabila Saeed or Marty Deuter in House District 45, Trump lost both of those districts by 13. But then you go to Chesney's district, Trump won it by 22. He won Blaine Wilhauer's district by 57 points. Think about that difference. That's how different and dynamic this state is. There are huge differences of opinion on Trump. But to me, I don't understand why we want to kick people out of the party just because they don't like one person. We've got to have a bigger tent than that.
Let me respond to just a couple of things before my head completely explodes. First of all, Liz Cheney would be the most conservative person on this screen if she were here. She is by far more conservative than any of us, and her track record shows that.
On ideology.
For those that think that Adam Kinzinger is some moderate squish, he was on board with Trump essentially until, he and his buddies
we weren't bombing enough people, Patrick. That's where he drew the line.
Tried to overthrow the government on January 6, 2021.
2021.
He had a 92% rating from the National Rifle Association, 100% rating from the National and State Right to Life Committees, American Farm Bureau Federation, National Federation for Independent Business, 94% by the Chamber of Commerce, and 77% by Americans for Prosperity. We are not talking about some lily-livered liberal squish here. This is a guy who stood on principle, whether you agree with him or not. And that's That's his choice. And Adam's my friend, and I'm going to defend him because he stood in the face of a really difficult onslaught from inside his own party, and a lot of his friends and family have abandoned him. And I know the feeling. And the NRSC wanted him to run for U.S. Senate here in 2020 or 2022, I guess it was, before, even before all of the January 6th stuff fired up. So it's not like he became a Democrat overnight. It was his principled response to January 6th that led to all of this.
But once again, we're mixing up conservative versus moderate, and then establishment versus grassroots. Ideologically, yes, you're right. Kinzinger didn't change, but from a political perspective, I mean, he's endorsing, even just in the municipals, he endorsed a bunch of Democrats in the municipals in 2025. So you may say ideologically he hasn't changed, but if he's out there actively working to elect Democrats, I don't blame Republicans for not wanting him. Sorry, buddy.
Well, and second of all, some 23-year-old kid telling me about Jim Edgar's legacy is bullshit. But let me also say
that's very ageist of you.
Let's avoid the personal attacks here. Buddy.
It's nice to know that young Republicans should not have a voice in the Illinois Republican Party. So that's nice to hear, Patrick Pfingsten, on the record that you think I should have an opinion. So.
But Patrick, let's
think your opinion is wrong.
The question,
that's fine.
The point is this.
Secondly,
can you be anti-Trump and be in this party? That's the point I want you to speak.
You don't have to agree with me, but don't tell me I don't have an opinion.
The issue here is that the Republican Party isn't the Republican Party anymore. It's not what it was for the entire time that I came up in politics, that I started as a reporter in politics when I started working in politics. It is the Trump Party. It is not the Republican Party anymore. And until it gets back to the ideology that it once believed in, those days are gone. And there is no room for the dissenter to dare leader in the Republican Party today.
Well,
which is part of the problem. Let's let Leslie jump in.
It's interesting to hear about how it's not the way it was when I was growing up, because people have changed. And there's a lot of things that are different now about what we think and how we do things from now. And I'm probably the oldest person on this podcast actually right now than when I was growing up. The Republican Party's changed a lot. And unfortunately, in some of those years, we didn't keep pace with, I'm just going to go back to my brand marketing message, which is what was most important in the eyes of the voters. And I will say, even though personally, I consider myself to be a pro-life person, I feel like as a matter of policy, for a state as diverse as Illinois with so many different opinions, that if you're a policymaker, you cannot shove a my way or the highway, no exceptions, no nothing down people's throats and expect to get elected. And so I think people who tend to be very conservative, which I think I am actually a very conservative person, have been able to see other people's points of views as ideas have changed over the years. And because of that, I think to some of the discussion we've had, I think you can be not in favor of Trump and still be a Republican. I think it's hard to imagine somebody who is like strictly anti, can never understand him, supports the Democrats, how you would ever want to be part of our party. And I think if we are honest with ourselves, that so in the case of Kinzinger, as an example, what bothered me most is he didn't ask questions and push back like a Republican would say, what about this? I think we have healthy concern about how honest our government has been in the past. But as I think about where we are, we failed over many years to evolve as a party to what was most important to the voters. We lost a lot of our voters, as I already shared those numbers earlier. We are now in a numerical minority, and we need to think about what's most important to people and bring them in. And personally, that's why I think most people, whether you love Trump or you tolerate Trump, I think our party is moving that direction. Maybe you don't love his personality, but what he's doing is financial stability, national security, compared to what I see Patrick shaking his head, compared to what
The
the
problem is just using words like
alternative.
stability when we're dealing with the tariff problem, but I get what you're trying to say, which
So
is
you know
fiscal
what? You have to take a
responsibility.
long-term view on that. So you take a long-term view, and it's possible he'll be wrong on that. There's some fluffiness now, but I actually take a lot of heart in the cabinet he put together and the
$10
quality.
trillion of wealth going poof isn't just fluffiness.
But
It's
either way,
not
let's let
not
Leslie finish her point.
gone. It's not gone unless you sold out. So, you know, it's market fluctuations. We've got a bad financial problem. You have to do things differently. I look at what's going on with peace around the world and some of the things that they're trying to lead there. I look at the fact that we're trying to bring more business and manufacturing and capability back to the US. I think those are all good things. And I think if you ask the general electorate, people who care about the things we care about, freedom, family, you know, God, you know, et cetera, as a party, our country, that even though Trump isn't exactly what we used to have, he is touching a lot of the things that are important to many people who are Republicans. So I'll say my husband and I supported Ron DeSantis in the primary because we thought he was a younger and at the time when Trump was so toxic with everything, I thought he might have a better chance of winning. As soon as DeSantis dropped out, we started supporting Trump because we thought those were the qualities we were looking for.
I think that's what we're asking for, right? It's
Still
we can have
called a
disagreements.
rhino.
We can have disagreements in primaries, and that's the point of primaries. It's in a general, can we come together? And that's the question. And really, I do see, again, as usual, I see both sides here have some wrong that they're not willing to see past. I mean, the Trump haters are absolutely unwilling to see anything that he does as a positive. He's evil, he's horrible, everything he does is wrong, which is a problem. You can't have that kind of viewpoint because everything he does isn't wrong. But the problem is that the Trump haters just can't see past that. But on the flip side, Patrick is correct. We're in an era right now where if you're not allowed to have even a tiny bit of disagreement with Trump. Otherwise, some will say you're not allowed in this party. We need to have a little bit more of a balance here where we allow people to have some disagreement. We can't just be a party about any one person. Even if that person is president of the United States, you can't just be a party about one person. We've got to be about more than just that.
For the record, doing a good thing like signing the Laken Riley Act is one thing that you can say he did right, but that pales in comparison to tanking our economy, protectionist trade policy, isolationism.
Free trade was going so well, Patrick. It was going so great for the United States. We're shipping every job to China.
You sure like that cheap stuff on Amazon, don't you?
Shops up in China going, can't pay the American worker a living wage. God forbid.
You guys are good. I like the disagreement. Let's just avoid the personal if you don't mind, Patrick. But otherwise, I like the disagreement. Ultimately, again, though, we need to find some common ground here. We've got to be able to say that can there be a space here? This is what I'm asking. Can there be a space here for those who are huge Trump supporters? Can you allow, you know what? Yes, you're not a Trump supporter. You're still welcome in my party. And for those who aren't Trump supporters, can you at least say, you know what? In a general election, I'm not going to go campaign for Kamala Harris. I'll just keep quiet. I'll step back. It just isn't my place right here to join this fight. Not a Trump supporter, but I'm certainly not going to go support the far left progressive Democrat that is Kamala Harris. This is our problem here is we're stuck on two extremes when there's a massive gulf in the middle that we could agree on. All right, let's go to the next one.
One other quick thing.
Let me take us to the next one, Leslie. I'm so sorry. I love you. We're way over time, and I want to keep us moving. Let's go to this because Leslie, you're probably going to have some thoughts on this because you brought this up a couple times. What is the Republican Party brand? My big push is we got to be more than one person. But here's the problem: what is that thing? Leslie's already said it a couple times, and she's right. You ask anybody, what is a Republican? Who is a Republican today? They don't have an answer for you. Ask me. I don't know, and I do this for a living. I'm a messaging guy for a living, and I couldn't tell you what the Republican Party stands for, especially in Illinois. I couldn't tell you what our brand is. And so that's my question to you all. If we do want to have a party that's bigger than, let's say, one person, like the president, well, then we've got to be able to have some sort of a brand that people can get behind. Right now, we don't have that. So what is our brand? What does it mean to be a Republican?
Well, I'll start out to say what I was working on before. So I did focus groups statewide with a lot of voters, with a small group of people, and we heard people say that what they cared most about, and these are things that I think the Republican Party does stand for, and could be uniquely positioned to be the party that delivers this, is the party that is the voice of the voters and not the voice of the special interests. on the state. So the Democrats seem to do whatever personal PAC pays them, so they go down that road, or the anti-gun people, or the woke crowd, or whatever it is. They're working for the special interest, and then our party tends to take the big freedom, patriotic, family-oriented issues that we stand for, and those are what the voters are most concerned about. And so I think that there is a space for us to own if we could all just get on a higher level, as I talked about before, get out of being pro-gun and being pro-safety, be pro-constitutional, following the Constitution, et cetera, as a way to talk about these things. And I
Get out of the issues and get more into the themes, the broader themes. Is
the
that
things
what
that
you're
are important to the voters. The voters don't get involved in all these issues. Maybe the gun people are. I mean, I'm a shotgun owner and trap shooter, so I'm not against any of that. But I don't go out and say that's the thing I'm most concerned about. What I'm most concerned about is making sure that we have a safe place for our families to live. To me, the Second Amendment keeps us safe. And so I think that there's a way that we can have a brand that we can all stand for that really is reflective of all of the roots of what our party has stood for over time and will stand for going forward, that will be important to people. But we don't seem to ever want to get to a level where we're all talking out of this.
And Leslie, isn't that the power? Like a theme, an overarching theme could play across the state. If you say we're for safety, as an example, what you just said, then you might translate that differently in Lincolnshire than maybe Moseley might translate it differently, where maybe for him it is about guns. Safety for them is about guns. Safety for you is about X. Like if we can provide the broader themes, then within these individual districts where people will have differences of opinions, we can empower our candidates and our leaders to translate the broader themes into what it means for Palatine, what it means for Champaign, what it means for Carbondale. Like that's what I mean here is what is that? What is that brand? Because then we could empower a very dynamic Republican Party where the issues may change district by district, but what it means to be a Republican doesn't change.
Exactly.
I think we're ultimately the common sense party. I think that's where it starts and stops for me. We're the common sense party, right? I mean, we want low cost of living. We want taxation to be low, right? We want economic policy to be prosperous. We want safety and security. We want energy independence, quality education, the things that at the end of the day, what most families care about. I mean, a family of four, working class people in Illinois probably care about their utility bill being low, being able to afford their home, their kids being safe, getting a quality education, and ultimately feeling safe and secure when they come home at night from a hard day's work. I mean, the common sense kitchen table issues, to me, that's who our party was supposed to be.
Christina's been trying, hold on, Chris. Christina's been trying to get in. Go ahead, Christina.
Oh, no, it's okay. Well, I think this is kind of a sad, pathetic question that we even have to ask this question is because we have Democrats in our party. In my town, I have people that are self-identifying as a Republican, but they won't put people that are Republican signs in front of their homes. They stand up for publicly BLM or transgender, DEI. And then we have people in the state party who are voting to have Democrats, are voting like Democrats to have men get pap smears and to have illegal aliens be police officers and be able to arrest American citizens. And it's because we have Democrats in our party. This shouldn't even have to be talked about. I mean,
well, so I'm going to agree with part of it, which is we shouldn't have to be talking about this. We should frankly have a brand. This is basics, as Leslie said. I come from the same world as she does. This is basics. You don't start a company, you don't start a brand, start a service without any sort of branding and messaging. So that part, you're right. We shouldn't have to be talking about this. The Democrats in our party part. I mean, again, this is our problem. We're calling people with which we have a political disagreement. You're a Democrat just because we disagree. You mentioned McCombie. Listen,
there's some things that are just
I have had very
Republican.
public beefs. I've had very public beefs with Tony McCombie, so I am not a Tony McCombie defender. But people are attacking her over a bill that, if somebody decides to get a sex change, If we're the party of individual responsibility and we say you can do whatever the hell you want in the comfort of your own home. So someone decides they're a female, they decide to change to a male. I don't understand why we fight that. You live your own life. I don't care what you do in the comfort of your home. But that person should still be allowed to get pap smears. That was what Tony voted for. And this is what we're saying. She's a Democrat because somebody who decided they wanted to change their gender. I wouldn't do it, but you know what? The Republican Party is supposed to be the party of individual responsibility. So fine, you want to do that to your own body, go for it. They should still be allowed to get pap smears. If you hate cancer, you should still let them.
They were already allowed to. They were already allowed to get them. I think that's the we're talking about.
That's what we're saying. She's now a Democrat because of that. I mean, listen.
Well,
Tony and I are nowhere near buddies, but I'm not calling her a Democrat because she made a vote I don't like about. And that's what we got to get away from the name calling. You made one vote I don't like. You're a Democrat. Like we got to stop.
Yeah, legislative intent on that bill, I think, is being permissive and buying into this this relentless pursuit of normalcy on these issues.
It doesn't have anything to do with branding, though. None of this has anything to do with branding.
I'm just clarifying that. I'm just clarifying that, Bill.
No, I respect you clarifying. I'm hearing a lot of like buzzwords being thrown around right now in terms of branding. I guess that's like kind of what marketing is. But like Collin Moseley is talking about like low cost of living and personal responsibility. Like all that stuff's like good, but like if you ask like the Democratic Party, do you believe in low cost of living and personal responsibility? They're going to say, yeah, we believe in that too. So there's not really a unique identifying factor that makes somebody a Republican versus a Democrat. And this is an interesting phenomenon that has taken place over the course of political history because right now the Republican Party doesn't really have an identity. There's kind of just like a bunch of different people who have different reasons for why they are specifically Republican, but there's not one unifying thing. The Democrats, you can look at them and say the one unifying thing they have is that the Democratic Party cares for the marginalized. And that's generally speaking something the Democratic Party kind of believes in universally. But the Republican Party, Butler might be a Republican for one reason. I almost called myself a Republican. Had to stop myself, everybody. But like, I might call myself a Republican. I might have a different reason for doing so. There's not like a unifying answer.
Sure there is. Sure there is.
Other than
Trump.
Donald Trump, which is Trump. But what was it before Trump?
Well, that was the Republican Party. That was our struggle. I mean, this has been our problem for a long time. We were going to lose in 2016. Only reason why a Republican won the White House in 2016 was Trump, because we were headed towards a loss. Because we've had this problem for a long time. We didn't have an identity before Trump. That's why, frankly, the party has become, to Patrick's point, the party of Trump, because we've struggled for an identity for a decade plus. So, I mean, it's an obvious reason why we're here, but I think that's the problem. Trump's not going to be around forever. The point is we've got to find an identity, and it has to be more than just about any individual, whether it's Trump or pick your favorite Republican. I don't care. We're not the party of kings. We had the Tea Party for a reason. We're not England for a reason. We've got to be about more than any one individual. And that's what I'm asking. What is that? Chris, you're right. There is more of an identity on the left than there is on the right. So what can our identity be? What can unify us? Is it the fact? Chris said they stand for the minority. What's wrong with standing for the majority? I mean, in a representative democracy, that's what we're supposed to do. And right now, thanks to Trump, whether you like him or not, he's made this party, instead of being the party of country club Republicans, we're now the party of working families. And that's a change that Donald Trump made to our party for the better. And so is that what it is? Is that we stand for, as Moseley said, common sense. We stand for the majority. We stand for working families. We could build an identity around that. Maybe that's a start here, but we got to start to do it.
I'll briefly say I hope that's the right answer, that it is the Republican Party fighting for working families, but I think we need to make an ideological move first, which we'll talk about in the next topic.
But either way, I mean, this lack of identity. Let me just point out, and again, I'm going to make as many enemies as I make friends in this podcast, but you go to the Illinois Republican Party's website and you go to what we stand for. It's 6 paragraphs of text that basically mean, I don't know what the hell. And then it's a link to our 11-page platform. That's what we stand for in Illinois. You go to Florida, it's simple. Keep Florida free. It's the freest state in the nation. They've got a brand. They've got an identity. That's everything. They've got something they can build around that's a theme, as Leslie keeps talking about. I get it. Florida's a red state, so maybe you say we can't do it like Florida does. So look at California. Look at New York. I mean, New York's tagline is more jobs, safe streets, better schools. That's it. This is what we align with. I don't think it should be issues like that. But you know what? If you want to go issues, pick 3 common sense issues like that, and we can all align around those issues. New York, that's what New York does. Arizona, it's freedom, opportunity, and security. I think Pennsylvania is a great example. They call themselves the Grand Opportunity Party. We're the party of hard workers, lovers of freedom, and protectors of family. What does that mean? We protect the American dream. We protect communities. We protect families. We protect taxpayers. There's something there you could unify around, you could get behind that, yeah, might look different in an R50 district versus a D10 district, but there's that commonality that, hey, if I'm a Republican in Pennsylvania or Florida or Texas or wherever, this is what I stand for. That's what we need here, is some sort of thing that can bring us together. Until we have that, we're never going to be able to unify.
Can I just mention one thing? Because we have a void in this, especially in Illinois, the Democrats define us.
Yeah.
And so the Democrats have defined us as against women. And that sticks. And I was going to mention earlier, I'll say make this quick, but I was on CBS on election night. And I'll just tell you, Lori Lightfoot was my counterpart on there for a while. And then partly with another one of the alder women who was a Democrat. You should have seen how shocked they were to see the election results come in throughout the evening, because they were so sure that Kamala was going to win. And what I took away from this whole thing was Illinois is completely out of touch with what is going on around the whole world, and what their own candidates are doing, what Biden was doing, what Kamala was doing. And they focused their hatred so much on Trump that they so took the positives of everything they heard out of our media. So all I could say is, if we had a loud message that was positive, that was something we all stood for and could all talk about together, and not be a void so the Democrats could define us, we actually might be able to win some of these seats, Collin, that you're talking about, where, the margin is 3 or 5 or 7. They don't hear a positive message from the Republicans. All they hear is negative, negative. We can't do this. We're against that. We're against that. We're against everything, instead of being for something big and important for them.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I think, yeah, you've got to have a positive message, and also be able to draw a contrast between ourselves and the Democrats. Because if you listen back to some of the previous episodes that we've done, at this point, we do not live in a serious state. The Democrats in Springfield are talking about legalizing prostitution, letting sex offenders live within 250 miles of a school. They think that you shouldn't have to work if it's under 40 degrees or over 80 degrees. I mean, it's just comical. And if you took these Democrats and you relocated them to a swing state like, North Carolina, and said, hey guys, good luck, JB, good luck, Katie Stewart, let's see how you do, they would just totally get blown out. But here we are, super minority, 40 seats, can't get anything done. And it's because I think it's in part, other than the unity issues and some of the other things we've talked about, it's that we're not consistently drawing a contrast between ourselves.
Leslie's 100% right. And this is an adage, this is known in communications and in life, let alone politics. You don't let your enemy define you. And in this case, we've let Democrats define us. That's our brand, and we've got to retake that brand. 100%, we need to define what it means to be a Republican. But because we haven't done it, we're letting everybody else do it for us. All right, let's go to our next topic. Thank you guys for being patient. I know we're above our time, but this is a great discussion, so thank you for sticking with us. Let's talk about this. This is a big fight often in our party, which is more important, ideological purity or winning elections. This is often what we see this fight distilled down to. We're like, oh, yeah, let's work together. Okay, fine, but then it's like, well, you want to be pure, you don't want to win. The other side says, yeah, but once you win, you got to govern. So we want somebody who actually agrees with us when you win. Both sides are right there, but the question really comes down to which of those are you going to say is more important, or are they equal? That's my question to you all. Is it more important to be ideologically pure? Is it more important to win? Or do you find some balance between those two? And this is specifically in our candidates.
I think that question on its face is a problem of itself, because to me, ideologically pure, I know what that means, and I know what that's getting at. But then winning elections, I think the people that are talking about wanting to win, wanting to do things differently, wanting to change how we approach things, and I know we're gonna get into that maybe later on in the show, and ballot chasing and other sort of targeted stuff, but it's a lot of the more ideologically pure people that are the grassroots, that are the conservatives,
But Moseley, isn't that the problem here? Isn't that always where we end up? In this kind of a discussion, it always ends up, well, do you want to win or do you want purity? Like that, I agree with you that it shouldn't have to be necessarily a choice, but this is where it always, the tracks, like the wheels come off here, always, is at this debate point. So that's why I wanted to spend some time here. Chris, go ahead.
What does ideological purity actually mean? What is the stopping point for someone to no longer be ideologically pure? Because we've just gone through a whole discussion about how the Republican Party doesn't have a brand, doesn't really have a platform much either, but we can discuss the platform maybe. But we don't have a brand. So how can we have an ideological purity test? Okay, because I can say, and I'm going to give Collin Moseley, because I know he's been wanting to talk to me about this, is that I could say that, like, Blaine Wilhauer is not ideologically pure because the MAGA conservative agenda says you have to be pro-worker. And Blaine Wilhauer, he objected to the RNC having the Teamsters president speak at it. I'd say he's ideologically unpure. He's a rhino. Can I say that? What's the drawing? Where do we draw the line for ideological purity? Can you say, I'm a Republican, but I believe in universal health care? Now, you might say that's wrong, but the reality is polling says that majority in some polls of Republican voters believe in universal health care. Are they not Republican any longer? So this is the problem we're coming into. There is no line. What is the sacred cow of the Republican platform that no longer makes somebody ideologically pure? That is the question I think we need to pose first before we can talk about ideological purity versus winning elections.
Chris, you made the point, you made it well, which is because we don't have a brand, everyone gets to define what they decide is purity. And that's part of our big problem as a party. And I'll jump to you in a second, Leslie. That's our problem as a party, is that each of us then gets to pick what we think ideological purity is. And so somebody from Will County has a different idea of what they think purity is versus McHenry County versus, Calhoun County. We all get to pick what we think is ideologically pure. And so, Chris, from your perspective, you could look at a Blaine Wilhauer and say, he's not pure because I look at purity through this lens. And then someone else could look at you and say, you're not pure because they look at the world through a different
I'm not pure. Oh, God.
On many levels, let's say that. But I think that's part of our problem here is if each person gets to define what they decide purity to be, that's where we're at as a party. That's why we can't get along, because we're each picking our own definition of purity. Leslie, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we have to have ideological purity at the thing that we don't have, which is our North Star, our what do we stand for at a very high level, call it, personal freedom, individual responsibility, something very high up, whatever that is, that, you referenced many ideas from the state before. Constitution is
Moseley brought crops.
Part of that. It's part of that. We are never going to agree on those lower level things. And I have always tried to take the point of view of William F. Buckley. I vote for the most conservative person I think who can win. And I go into the primary with that attitude. I do not vote for the most conservative, and I get called a rhino for supporting people who maybe aren't the most conservative in the primary, but I have run for office statewide, and I know that that person is never going to make it through the northern suburbs, and they won't be elected. So the most conservative person who can win, I think, for me, is my ideological.
Well, let's talk about, I want to make sure we bring data to this. I think something that hasn't been said enough. You hear the Bailey hate coming out. Let me give you some numbers. I mean, there were a lot of people leading up to the Bailey race who said that we just need somebody who's a pure conservative, or whatever term you want to use, and they're going to win in Illinois. And then you saw the moderates who all said, well, look, he lost. Ha, ha, ha. You conservatives are wrong. But I'm looking at the data here. We were able to prove in our analysis of 2022 that in ex-urban areas and rural areas, Darren Bailey not only did extremely well, he had coattails. Republicans gained 6, 7, or even 8 points in some of these districts because, yes, somebody who was more conservative or pure was was able to increase turnout. That is absolutely correct. You run somebody, even statewide, who is more conservative and more on that platform, they are going to increase conservative turnout. And we saw it. You saw statewide, Bailey and DeVore gained 2 points overall, even because of this. Bailey outperformed Rauner by 3 points. He doesn't get credit for that. I mean, this is the issue here, is that in some areas of the state, that does help the party. We've talked about Blaine Wilhauer. In his House district since 2016, it's gone from R37 to R59 over those a 6-year period. I mean, that is the change that's happened in the world, in our actual families and communities, not just in the Republican Party. So yes, it is true that if you run those candidates who are stronger on those principles, more ideologically pure, they're going to increase turnout. The problem is, this is also true that there are areas of the state where that hurts us. Where Bailey outperformed Rauner, but in Chicago, he underperformed by 1. In suburban Cook, he underperformed Rauner by 5. In the suburbs, he underperformed by 9. The rest of the state, he overperformed by 12. This is what we have to come back to, is that it is a big-ass state, and it is a very different state. What might play in Chicago or in Will County isn't necessarily going to play maybe down in Butler's region, and vice versa. That's the challenge here, is that, yes, Bailey, being that pure candidate, did overperform in some areas. He also underperformed in some areas. We just can't seem to accept both of those things, that in some areas, yes, that helps us. In some areas, maybe it doesn't help us as much.
Just a fun fact on this, in the greater Chicago area, Chicago, the collar counties, and then I would say the extended collar counties that would include Kankakee County, et cetera, 69% of the vote in the state of Illinois is in that area. So we can have a candidate that does great everywhere else in the state, but if you do not get at least a decent shot in those areas, that candidate is unelectable state.
Yeah, let me give that breakdown, because I had our team pull it. Chicago is 18% of the vote. Suburban Cook is 19% of the vote. The suburbs are 26. The rest of the state is 37. Again, dynamic state. We got to be able to think bigger. This is a huge state, and some things are going to play in some areas, but not in others. I gave Wilhauer's district and how it's become more red. Let me flip that. Let's look at Curran's Senate District 41. He's going to be up. He's going to be in a tough election. In 2016, his district was R4. It's moved all the way to D7 now. That's the change. So in the suburbs, mostly driven by a dislike of Trump amongst the voters, these voters have gone more blue. In rural areas and even exurban areas, they've gone more red. That's the state we're fighting in here and trying to win it.
But there are also people in those districts, and again, I'm fortunate a bit to get into the winning part, but there are people in those districts, though, hard Republicans, that aren't voting in midterms, that aren't returning their mail-in ballots.
We hear this all the time.
Midterm
If
has
you
always
have a way
been
to
more
make those
conservative.
people show up, Collin,
But Collin, but here's the thing.
Not
I gave you
only
the
the
Trump
ballot
numbers. You're saying they're not showing up, but I used the Trump numbers. If anybody's going to get them out,
Well, I know,
it's Trump.
but I think we're
And he
leaving
still
ballot
lost
numbers.
these districts by 7 or 9 or 10. So this idea that just run somebody even more pure and they'll turn out even more magical voters,
I'm not saying
accurate.
purity. I mean, John Curran is John Curran. I'm talking about you run John Curran in 2026, but get out and put dollars behind running down first of all, the probably 2,000 mail-in ballots to hard R households that aren't returned. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's worth looking at that and saying, hey, look, there's these 2,000 ballots going to households that are reliably Republican that will not be returned unless we go get them.
But it's an and. This is the problem we face. It's always the or, and it needs to be the and. And Moseley, what you were just talking about is an and. But we're always saying it's or. Either you're Bailey or you're, I don't know, whoever. It's got to be the and, which I think is what you're trying to say. That let's take the best of both worlds. That a John Curran fits his district. Can we also increase conservative turnout to even help him win even by an even larger margin? Like, can we do an and here where it isn't having to pick one side or the other? Because the reality is Trump himself didn't do well in some of these districts. In 2024, in Lake County, he lost by 21 points. So this idea that we need to be more of a Trumpian party, it's going to lose you DuPage. It's going to lose you Lake. But can we live in a world where it's not or, where we can accept that a John Curran fits his district really well, that a Mary Cole was the best choice to potentially take Lake County, even if she wasn't Trump? Like, can we look at this world in a more dynamic way that says, let's get the best of both sides, instead of constantly saying it has to be either or. You either have to be Mark Kirk or you have to be Darren Bailey. You have to be Richard Irvin or you have to be Darren Bailey. Like, can we stop with the or, with the fighting back and forth, and just say both? We need both.
But the data, I think, shows you that there has to be a more moderate strain of Republican to win statewide. Think about the Republicans that have won statewide in the last call it 30 years. You've got Bruce Rauner, Judy Bart Topinka, Mark Kirk, Jim Edgar, Jim Thompson, right? George Ryan kind of straddled the fence on the issue, but what did they have in common? They were all pro-choice. And I'm not necessarily saying it has to be pro-life versus pro-choice. You can probably get a pro-life candidate that doesn't scare the hell out of suburban women, but certainly those more moderate candidates are the ones that resonate with suburban voters. And until Republicans play with suburban voters, they are dead on arrival. Dead on arrival.
And Patrick, the last thing you said was correct, but here's where I want to get us to get to this common ground. You just said something that I thought was really smart. It said, maybe someone pro-life could win as long as you don't scare voters. And I think this is where we always connect these dots. Conservative versus moderate, that's you're scary or you're not. It's not ideological. We all know voters don't think based on ideology. It's, are you scary to the voters? Can you connect with the voters? That's the key distinction. Darren Bailey didn't lose because he was too conservative. He lost because he couldn't connect with voters. That was his problem, not because he was too conservative. There was no connecting with the voters. I've seen plenty of great conservatives in the suburbs, like Peter Roskam, who have won, but they were also conservative. This is that we can't keep connecting those dots. The only way you're not going to be scary to voters is a moderate. That's where we keep losing it. It's not about ideology to the voters. But we always say the only way to not be scary to suburban voters is pro-choice and moderate. That's not actually true. It's, can you present an image to the voters that they'll want to vote for? You can do that as a conservative. You can do that as a moderate. We just haven't succeeded at that.
Can I say something also about just the voter? Because we keep talking about how the demographics have changed because of Trump and, the voting. People are now becoming more Democrat because of Trump. The other thing we're seeing, and we've seen it in Lake County here, is the Republicans who used to live here, and maybe that's where some of these mail ballots, went, that they're not here anymore. They've moved out of state because they've retired or whatever, the Republicans have tended to be older in the parts of the population and have left. And the people who are filling in are people coming from Chicago and moving out to the suburbs. And so it's not just a Trump issue. It's a bigger issue for us. At some point, Trump isn't going to be in office, but we're going to have to address the fact that we need to have an image, a brand, and policies that connect with the younger voters, because that is also where we've been vulnerable.
Yeah, we've got to disconnect in our heads ideology versus quality. For too long, we've just connected those and required those to be connected. And that is part of our problem here. Just because you're conservative or moderate doesn't make you a higher quality candidate. And that's where we've run afoul of the voters. We run low quality candidates who happen to be conservative or moderate. And then they lose and we're like, look, see, it was because they were moderate, or it was because they were conservative. I mean, Leslie said she wants the most conservative candidate who can win. Kristina, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know in the prep for this, you talked about, you have a similar philosophy, right? You want the most conservative possible person you can get in each district, but that might look different in an R30 district versus a D10 district. I'm not putting words in your mouth when I say that, right? Kristina, I'm asking you straight up.
I'm sorry, I had you on mute. I think that we need to run on conservative policies. I think that there is basic things you need to believe in an ideology as a Republican. And I think that we are running people that would be way off the charts Democrat as Republicans. I mean, you should not be standing for BLM. You shouldn't be standing for for having LGBTQ and transgender books in our libraries. I mean, there are people that they're running that I don't even know what they stand for. I mean, and it's not just about if you're conservative or not, or Darren Bailey was too conservative. There's a lot about, a little bit about political identity and, does somebody like that, represent the suburbs of Chicago and, their personalities and the different things about them and stuff. So there's a lot that comes into play with that. But I think you do need to have a certain set of ideologies and values to run as a Republican. Absolutely.
Yeah. And with that,
I think the Republican Party needs to come out and they need to support them.
And if we can align with that, if we can align under a certain theme or guiding principles, my question to you then is, can we work with that? Can we then accept that, okay, somebody in a Will Howard district or a Chesney district might look different than somebody in a Curran district or somebody who could knock off a Suzanne Ness or whoever else? Like, they might look a little bit.
I don't think we should be playing purple. No, I don't. And I don't think that Republicans.
And that's why you're losing.
No, I don't. That is not why we're losing. The establishment is actually fighting conservative people out here to play purple. And when you get in these purple playing milquetoast people, they're not moving the needle to the right. They're not. And that's why we end up
Freedom
with
Club
transgender
members
votes
are
in our
never
life.
going to win Marty Deuter's seat.
But
Or
you're
Suzanne
doing-
Ness's
We
seat.
could. If we came out, we made people aware
Bullshit.
of
The numbers don't back it up.
We could.
It's
We
not back
Listen,
to
I
back.
understand
Absolutely
you're playing
could
for
happen.
Lieutenant
And you
Governor
know what?
here, but
It's
that's
another
not how it
issue
works.
about
The data does not back it up, and
Republicans
no
aren't
political
voting.
strategy backs it up. That is way out of left field. It's
Republicans
clueless.
are not voting. That's the problem. They're not
Because
coming
they're
out
not
and voting.
Republicans anymore.
I mean, the difference.
Because
so
they
Kristina,
are Republicans. They're
one-
identified Republicans. A lot of hard Republicans aren't voting. And we
One of
need
the
to
problems-
utilize this mail-in ballot system to get them to get their votes in. Yes, absolutely. There
One
are
of the
enough
problems-
Republicans to
One of the
flip
problems is a
this
lot of the
area
people that
and
I've
the state.
seen, Kristina, a lot of the people that I've worked with in the suburbs who have used to call themselves Republicans who don't vote anymore, the people you're talking about, they're not not voting because we're not asking them to vote. They're not voting because they don't like Trump. In the suburbs, some of those people you're saying aren't voting. It's not because they're so ideologically pure that they don't like that we're not running a conservative enough candidate. A lot of the people in the suburbs have chosen a different reason why they're not voting. It's they don't like this version of the Republican Party. So to think it's monolithic, that if we just run even more conservative candidates, that magically more of them will show up. Trump just proved that's not true. We've seen that. That's not true. Trump himself lost these districts by 10 points. So tell me who you're going to find who's even more conservative in that district who's going to flip 10 points.
In DuPage County, which I assume everyone on this screen agrees, Republicans need to win. Obama beat Romney in 2012 by 1 point. By 2016, Hillary Clinton won it by 15 points. By 2020, Biden won it by 18 points. Trump cut that number down a little bit in 2024. I think that has more to do with Harris than Trump. But certainly that's not because the candidate got more conservative that they magically did better. They did worse. They did 14 points and 17 points worse in the matter of 4 and 8 years. You tell me that it's because they're not running conservative enough candidates.
They're not running anybody that stands for really anything.
That's Trump.
They're all playing
That's literal.
this
That's your
purple
literal
line.
orange
It is
boy.
not
That's your
energizing
boy.
people to vote, and Republicans are staying home.
He's
It's
run
what it
all
is.
the Republican
There are
voters
enough
out of DuPage
Republicans.
County. They're
Let me
gone.
bring this up, okay? But I keep going back to, we have the Trump numbers. Trump himself didn't win those districts. Trump himself didn't win DuPage. So what I don't understand, Kristina, is this idea that we run somebody else, they're going to outperform Trump by 16, 17, 18, 20 points. Trump himself couldn't win it. So who are you going to find who's going to do better than Donald Trump?
Well, I think there's
We
nuance.
are doing a good job in DuPage County of getting these Republicans energized, getting out to vote, telling them the issues. And we just really don't have a Republican Party here. And it's unfortunate. We need to get people out, have a grassroots thing going to, door to door and getting our standards and our vision and just everything out. Our people are just not voting. They're being apathetic. They're being apathetic.
But in the Trump
We're just
election,
not
when they
energizing
did
them
vote,
here.
he lost.
Vote.
So, unfortunately, the data just doesn't back that up.
To me, I think the data that I'm interested in, and first of all, this is our last election with Trump at the top of the ticket, or was. It was, yes, he's still our president in the midterm here, and I know that matters, and I know in 26 his influence. He's going to be relevant until he dies. But what I'm interested in is, okay, you look at Martha Deuter's district, House District 45, in 2020 we talk about the Trump effect. Okay, well, let's take an election where Trump is not on the ticket. Okay, which, by the way, we've never lost a seat in the House. We've never decreased seats in the General Assembly in the House with Trump at the top of our ticket. Never.
We've also never picked up seats.
No, I don't disagree. But hey, look.
No, in
that's
16
fine.
they picked up seats, Colin. They picked up seats in 16, didn't they?
That's
And then we
true.
lost them.
We picked up
right.
Senate seats.
In the midterm. But I also think that data from 15 years ago or 10 years ago is not relevant anymore because we've lost 500,000 people in Illinois. But House District 45, we lost by 364 votes. And there were over 1,100 hard Republican voters that got a mail-in ballot that did not return it. And I'm not saying it's a magic bullet. But what I am saying is, and this is where I think I'm more interested. I hate to say this. I said it last time we had this show when we discussed people that announced Mendrick and whatever. Right now, I could honestly give a crap less who runs for governor in Illinois, because I just could. Okay, it's way too early for us probably to even know what's going to happen. We'll see what their strategies are. I'm interested in trying to get out of the super duper minority that we're in. And I think that there are a handful of General Assembly seats where there are thousands of hard Republicans receiving mail-in ballots that are not returning them, that it's at least worth a shot to go try and get them, especially in places where we're only losing by 500 votes or 1,000 votes.
Yeah,
So
you're talking tactics, which you're right. We need ballot harvesting. We need to do a better get out the vote program. 100% correct.
Ballot harvesting is illegal in Illinois, by the way.
Yeah, well, Democrats do it. We can find a way to do it too.
I mean, there's nuance. There's nuance to this.
But I think the larger point is you guys are on tactics, which you're right, and you're right, Kristina. In DuPage County, we don't have a party to speak of, so you're not wrong in that. But the point is, this topic is about the candidates we run, and can we run candidates who can win? And the point is, there's this idea that if we just run the purest possible candidate, they're going to find these magic votes to win. Bailey couldn't do it. Trump couldn't do it multiple times. That's not working. So ideally, can we find common ground? Can we find the most conservative candidate who can win, like Leslie talks about? That's going to look different.
Kristina's plan is shrinking the tent, and you've got to expand the tent if you're ever going to win.
Which is the point. We have to grow the tent if we're going to win, which means
we need to
yes,
those
that means our moderates and our Patrick Pfingstens of the world have to accept that in the Freedom Caucus region, those are the most conservative candidates who can win. So stop hating them. But in exchange, the Freedom Caucus people have to stop hating Leslie Munger or Patrick Pfingsten because they supported somebody.
I like Leslie Munger.
Maybe
I
have
like
to be a little more
Munger.
moderate, but they're
I
running
like
in County where
Illinois
Trump
a
lost by
lot,
20
a
points.
lot. Yeah.
That's where we've got to be able to
I
find
like
some
Leslie.
alignment. If we can't grow this tent, if we can't grow the party, we're not going to win. And I think that's where, if we keep having this fight, if we don't grow the party, we are not going to win. There is not. We've shown the data over and over. There isn't a magic little bucket of Republican voters that's just going to magically show up when they haven't done it for over a decade. It's about, can you find the most conservative candidate in districts that can win? That means stop hating on the Freedom Caucus, but it also means stop hating on those moderate candidates in DuPage or Lake, where the district is, 10% more Democrat than Republican, where Trump lost it by 13 points. It's just the reality of the data. To me, we need candidates who can actually connect with the voters. It's about quality more than anything else. And that's where we seem to miss the boat all the time. We focus so much on, are they with me on these 36 issues, and miss the fact that they're not likable and never could win an election for dog catcher, let alone governor or state house or state senate. That's where we miss the boat. All right, we're way over time. Let me move us to the next one. So here, this one I know Kristina felt passionately about, so we got to make sure she gets a chance to talk about it. Should the party be getting involved in primaries? There's lots of different opinions on this. Number one, which is Patrick said, some of the primary voters are choosing candidates that are losing in the general elections, that we let them just keep picking losing candidates. There's also the belief or the concern that the Democrats in this state, like Pritzker in 2022, like the Democratic Party in 2025, where they're getting involved in our races and our primaries to push their candidates. I mean, they're cheating. They're playing in our ballgame. How do we overcome that? Pritzker comes in with millions of dollars to try to screw up our primary. We need some way to fight back against that. So what do we do? If you believe the party should be getting involved in primaries, say so and say why. If you think they shouldn't, say so and say why. Kristina, go ahead and kick us off, because I know you felt strongly they shouldn't.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Well, I just think that we should not be getting involved. The party shouldn't be getting involved in any primaries whatsoever. I think it should be between the people in that area. And even on the lowest level, I've noticed in just local township parties and in my area, that if you are aligned or you're establishment-y and anointed by the establishment, then you will have a certain amount of people come to your event. You will have a certain amount of donations and they will back you, right? And so then these people that are conservative or grassroots or something that come up and the people want, they are just left on their own and sidelined and not helped at all. And that bothers me as well. I mean, that's a problem. I think that you need to I don't think the party should get involved in primaries whatsoever. No, I don't.
And I think there's a fair point there, especially because when the party picks winners and losers, they tend to pick badly. So you certainly have a solid point there. The only question I'd ask you is, what do we do then? If Pritzker comes in and spends millions of dollars to play in our primary, how do we combat that? How do we combat that? If the party can't get involved, because I do hear your point, then how do we beat back that, where the Democrats are cheating and coming and playing in our races?
Yeah, they ran a Democrat in our primary, Richard Irvin.
We're trying to find common ground here, guys. Trying to find solutions here, guys.
I
Like,
mean,
how do you, if you don't want the party to get involved in primaries, which I get, because I agree with that, but then what do we do about Democrats trying to get involved in our primaries then? Because we
So
don't
you
have
want
a
my
method to fight back.
answer? Like, I can give you my answer, Colin.
Go for it.
You get involved in theirs. You just start like you would. This would just have to
what
be
money?
like this is, obviously a big brained idea, probably too complex for most Illinois Republicans. But like, you find some vulnerable Democrats who are in deep blue districts, and you just you get your donors up because the Republican Party's donors are donating to the Democrats for doing the same thing. So let's do something here. Let's primary some Democrats with some more moderate conservative Democrats. That's what you do. That'll really show that this. You have to fight them on their own terms if you don't want like the Republican Party to get involved in primaries.
I certainly like being tactical. I think I would go the other way, Chris, and try to make sure, do the Pritzker, make sure we're helping elect the most progressive, or not elect, let me say this better, making sure we help the Democrats nominate the most progressive candidate they can so we can beat them in a general.
The problem is we won't beat them. That's the problem with that idea.
If you want to play tactics, that's the tactic.
And had the Uline and Griffin crowd been smart in 2018, they would have put a shit ton of money behind Daniel Biss and gotten him to win that primary. In which case, Rauner may have had a shot to win that general election. The reality is here: if you're a Republican, do you want the state central committee behind you? I mean, it is a jamoke group who can't get its act together.
Right. Excellent.
And I wouldn't want them on my team.
Yeah,
they can't tie their own shoes. They can't raise money. They've got under $1 million in their state and federal PACs combined. What are they going to influence? How are they going to help you?
Yeah, and that's what we talk about a lot. Is the party getting involved tends to make things worse, not better. But can the party afford not to get involved to some capacity? This idea that they should just stay all the way out, maybe is there common ground where the party should just promote all Republican candidates. Let's help the Republican candidates get their message out, and then let the voters decide. Like maybe instead of just staying all the way out, we say there's common ground here. Don't pick winners and losers, but let's amplify all Republicans so we actually help our Republican candidates connect with the voters.
Well, I mean, Mike Z and crowd tried to cannibalize the state party in 2018 or 2022, and it didn't work. And that's essentially trying to get the mail discount. But, I mean, the infrastructure isn't there. So it doesn't help you in the long run.
Butler, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in most cases, an endorsement from the state party in a Republican primary is probably more of a liability than an asset. But I think that there is an important distinction when it comes to the caucuses, because they have a vested interest in seeing a certain candidate win a primary, especially if there's an incumbent Republican in that seat.
Yeah,
I know you're talking about incumbency, which is different than in an open race.
I think we're talking about both. Maybe we should clarify that because for example, where I live, and I would say, I'm going to say that, look, we have 40 seats right now. There are 5 or 6 that in a perfect storm could be in play for us in the House. But I'm going to say that probably in less than 8 districts in the House anyway, that it really matters who wins the primary. So, because where I live and all the seats surrounding me, maybe I'm all the way west until maybe you get over to Kevin Schmidt. Like, if this is a hard R area no matter what. So no, and I'm going to probably catch flack for saying this, but it didn't really matter whether Dave Severn or Angela Evans won that primary. The seat was reliably red. The only person it mattered to was who she was going to vote for leader when the election was over and where the allegiances were at. But when you get into the places where, okay, maybe we're like our previous conversation about ideology and stuff, I think that there are only a handful of seats where it could even be, the argument could even be made. The party has a vested interest, and I still think at that point, if we're wasting money in a primary on a seat that is absolutely going to stay red, it's money we can't spend to beat a Democrat. That's stupid.
Leslie's been trying to jump in. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's only 1 or 2 times in my memory of 16 years of being involved in all this where it would have made sense, or it did make sense for the party to get involved in a primary. And that was when we had literally wacko candidate up there. I can think of one who was
the Nazi Art Jones.
Art Jones, yeah.
Congressional, yeah. There was that Susan, I can't remember her last name now, but she got up in these big debates and she was just like mentally ill. There was something wrong.
Andy
So
Martin is another one. You might
in
remember him.
that case, I think, but otherwise, in my experience, it's been just detrimental because it causes division especially in the grassroots and in the township. I've seen it in Lake County in the past, and I say our current chairman, Keith Brin, has said no endorsements. We're not getting involved in the primaries. We're going to let everybody run their own. It just caused a lot of strife and a lot of angst and a lot of division. And so
here's what I've seen done in other states, and we'll close with this and then go to our closing thoughts. So here's what I've seen done in other states. It's the NRCC model where they create a benchmark program. And if candidates can reach certain benchmarks, then they get, okay, if you do this, you get that. If you do this, you get that. If you raise money, build an infrastructure, have grassroots, knock on doors, do what a winning candidate does, you get access to extra resources. That's what a lot of other states do. That's what the NRCC does for their candidates. They don't pick winners and losers. They don't choose who they like or don't like. They don't get involved based on ideology. Oh, we only like conservatives or we only like moderates, because that gets messy and the party shouldn't be picking winners and losers. But our point is winning, right? Leslie, you said we want candidates who can win. And so what they do is they say, okay, if you prove you can win, regardless of ideology, you get access to extra things because you've shown you're a winning candidate. That's what some states do. It's called a benchmark program. It does work very well. We don't see it really ever in Illinois, but can we amplify? Can we give all Republicans a platform? Don't pick winners and losers. And then you know what? Transparently, if you can do X, if you can raise money, get grassroots behind you, get door knockers, go build out an infrastructure, have a real campaign, you've now proven you're a winning candidate. So you get access to extra things. We're now amplifying winning candidates instead of getting involved based on who the chairman of the county likes or doesn't like, or who their consultants hired by, or all that BS. It's transparent and it's fair and it's open. That's what other states do. It's something worth considering here. So we're not picking winners and losers just because we happen to like somebody over the other person.
Right.
All right, we are way over time. So here's what we're going to do. Where the rubber meets the road here is how do we start winning elections in Illinois? So what I want to ask you guys is I'm going to just give each of you as your closing thoughts here. Tell us how you think we can start to win in Illinois. Let's avoid, if we can, fighting back and forth because we're just way over our time. But what do you think is the path forward? And ideally, please try to talk about where you could see some common ground, even with those people you disagree with. How can we work together to start to win in Illinois? Anyone can go first. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. I think the way we win is we get unified on a common, important, big umbrella message that we can all agree on. And we've already discussed how that could be modified depending on where the location is in Illinois, but at least start with a common goal. I think we also all have to embrace the fact that winning is everything in this. Getting candidates out there who have no chance of winning just so we can prove a point just leaves us behind again, makes it harder to raise money, etc. And I think the final thing we need to do is we need to, as a party, we've talked a lot about the grassroots and the establishment and this and that. We have to understand that we all have a role to play in this, and we need to clearly understand what those roles are and work together, just like anyone does in a business. The grassroots, I'm part of the grassroots. It's critical to get that door, to turn out the vote and to get people engaged at a low level. But it's also critical that we have somebody looking at the big picture over all the candidates in the state and planning for the things to make all of our elections more successful. And we need both, and we shouldn't be fighting about it. So stop fighting, get together, one message, unify, be positive.
Pretty solid closing thoughts for you, Leslie. Thank you. Who else? Who wants to go next?
I think that we need to unify behind a common message, like Leslie said. We've got to recruit good, high quality candidates that represent the areas that they're running in, right? That fit their district. You've also got to, especially in a midterm cycle, you've got to do two things. You've got to persuade people to vote Republican, and you have to convince low propensity Republicans that their vote matters and that they need to get out, because there's a lot of Republicans in this state that only vote in presidential elections. They don't show up for midterms. They don't show up for municipals, and that's a problem. But you have to do both of those things. You can't just focus solely on, oh, let's just turn out all the Republicans. You also have to convince people that are, moderates, independents, soft Democrats, hey, vote for this Republican for state rep or for governor or for U.S. Senate, right? Maybe we don't get them to vote straight Republican, but maybe this next cycle we can get them to vote for a few Republican candidates.
Yeah, and not or. Solid, Michael. I agree.
And
Yeah.
I've got a three-pronged strategy for you. It starts with convincing primary voters that they need to nominate someone specifically statewide or in the suburbs who can win. That may sometimes be a conservative, that may sometimes be a moderate, but it has to be a person who can win. And too often primary voters are concerned with the person that is best on Facebook video or has the best tweets or says the most radical things. Think about who can win. That's the number one issue. Two is raise money. The Republican fundraising infrastructure is shit. Let's be frank. The business community has abandoned the Republican Party. Give them a reason to come back. Convince the chamber to start acting as a fundraising conduit, which they've never done, even though they're all members and they're all have the ability to write checks. Get a small dollar program going. Nobody has raised money on this homeschool issue. Nobody, none of them have raised money on the homeschool issue. And three, and some of you are going to hate this, and that's fine, and I think it's specifically for the suburbs, but the party and the candidates have to move on from Trump and present to voters a set of issues that appeal to moderate suburban women so that they can start to pick off some of these seats. Because if they can't pick off these marginally Democratic seats, these 5, 8, 10-point Democratic seats, they will be in a perpetual superminority. They have to find a message that works in the suburbs, and it's going to be a more moderate message than in Blaine Willauer and Regan Deering's districts, right? It has to be a message that fits the district. And if that pisses off some downstate conservatives, so be it, because you got to win.
Appreciate your thoughts. Not a lot to disagree with there, Patrick. Thank you. Go ahead. Who else has got thoughts?
I'm going to jump in because I may have to go. I got somebody in the driveway. To me, I think we got to stop this insanity campaigning, this trying the same thing over and over and over and over again, looking for a different result. The things we did to elect somebody to office when I was just, a fetus probably aren't going to work anymore. So I think there's a lot of room to explore some new opportunities, some new ways to get people elected. I think we need to stop spending money. And to Patrick's point, I'll agree with Pfingsten on something, and it is that fundraising sucks in Illinois as a party because and to their defense, why would they give money to a broken system that's giving them no ROI? So I'll agree on that. But I think the money we do raise, we've got to stop spending it on things that aren't working, that are antiquated, and start spending it in better ways. In more advanced ways. And the last thing is I think we have to define what winning looks like. Because what winning looks like to some people might only be statewide elections. And to other people, and again, I'm being selfish here, but to me, right, I would love to see us start chipping away at some seats in the General Assembly. I think the approaches to that are a little different than a statewide race. That's just where my heart's at. So, what does winning look like?
Well, I mean, Moseley, to your point, the reality is we got Ronner elected. We weren't able to change much because we didn't also get state reps and state senators and county board members and county-wide people elected. So you're absolutely right. We just getting somebody statewide doesn't change it. We already tried that. It didn't work. We're going to have to see more wins than just that. All right, Kristina, your final thoughts.
Okay. My final thoughts are that I think we need to get, it's not anybody that's not moderate. It's just, we just need principled Republicans that stand up for things, tell people what they're standing up for, and make people aware of this to make sure that they're compelled to vote. Some people don't even know that it's time to vote, in the off-term cycle elections. And we need to make sure that these people are aware, know what our candidates are running on. It compels them to get out and vote. And even these people, we need to make sure we get their votes. We need to make sure that everyone is now signing up for a mail-in ballot. And that's a massive problem in the Republican Party. I know that everyone, all these conservatives hate it. And they're like, screw the mail-in ballots. But the problem is we're in Illinois. We're not going to change it. This isn't Florida. We have to play by their game. So let's use their dirty tactics against them. And there's enough Republicans that if they just get their mail-in ballot to their mailbox and just send it on back, that we could absolutely win. And then I think don't play in the primaries. Let the people pick who they want to pick. And then whoever is that person against the Democrat, we rally behind. And I think that that's where we should be. That's how I like to play it.
I 100% agree with you, and I think I like how you described it. Moderate versus conservative. When you talk about moderate, sometimes people think that's squishy, right? Like moderates who don't believe in anything. Yeah, I get why that would be frustrating to you, and you wouldn't.
Well, I'm in DuPage, and these people are going way off the reservation to just complete
but if you see
Democrats.
principled people who maybe just disagree with you on a few things, now that's something we could get behind. It's having a principled stand. I like the way you worded that.
Yes.
Chris, your final thoughts before we close this down.
I want to state for the record that I agree with pretty much a lot of the things that Collin Moseley said in his closing statement. I know that Collin and I are we're the youngest people on this podcast, and we have radically different political opinions on a variety of topics, but I think he's right on a lot of things. My vision for how you would fix the Republican Party would start with you do have to change your perspective of what winning looks like Collin said. But I view it a little bit different, that you have to basically recognize the fact that you are not going to win probably in 2026. You have to kind of recognize it from a statewide perspective. Like, can you win? Maybe, but you have to kind of recognize the fact that it is a very uphill battle. So you have to ask yourself, what does winning look like in that scenario? And to me, I think the Republican Party needs to take some pretty ambitious steps to do things like attempt to turn out low propensity Republicans in a midterm election, appeal to Hispanic voters, which is something that hasn't been discussed at all on this podcast, has been Hispanic voters, and the drastic movement of them to the Republican Party in this state, or at least to Donald Trump. I think you need to take some bold strategy points, and I think you need candidates who are willing to say what's wrong in this state. If you're a Republican and you believe that the state of Illinois is moving in the wrong direction, then you need to build a message that explains why that is. And maybe that won't win you an election in 2026. But maybe if you focus on specific races, you could pick up some House seats. You might look at a congressional seat and say, let's see what we can do here. And you're going to move the needle enough to where you become competitive again. Because right now the Republican Party isn't competitive. That's the problem. So you have to get to the point where you're competitive first. And then you can go to your donor base and you say, listen, these are the tactics we employed. We knocked on this many ballot doors for ballot chase. We were able to turn out this many that weren't returned 4 years ago. We weren't able to turn out this many more Republicans than turned out 4 years ago. We were able to move these numbers in the 14th ward of Chicago, the 15th ward, the 33rd ward, all these different wards you're making movement in, and you're saying this is what is possible. And then in 2028, and 2030, once you've achieved competitive status, you can actually move for victory and change in the state, because we all know it's been said by, Tim Ozinga and his Big Tent coalition that you need to get to out of the super duper minority in one house, and you need a governor's mansion to change the maps in this state. That's what the game plan is. But will it happen? I don't know. I don't know if anybody's going to listen to the ramblings of this balding political consultant on this now 3-hour podcast. I don't know if we're going to be at that point yet. But I think the Republican Party needs to take some risks, and it needs to hyper-focus and say, this is where we're going to play this time. We have this much resources. And yeah, you're going to cut some people off at the knees. The grassroots might not be too happy about it, because some people might be left in the darkness. But the Republican Party needs to recognize that they are not even a competitive product right now. They need to completely revamp the way they're doing things, and they have to move the needle in one direction first before it can move it all the way to victory. That's how you fix the Republican Party.
I appreciate your thoughts. As you mentioned, this has gone super long. So thank you, Leslie, Collin, Patrick, Kristina, especially you guys for taking so much time. Chris and Michael, I pay them, so they can stick around. Who cares? But to the other, you four, thank you for giving us so much of your time. For those who are watching and viewing, clearly we've got more work to do, but there is more that unites us than divides us. And we certainly all agree we got to start to win this state so we can start to change policies and get us out of whatever the ridiculousness that the far left is taking us to. So thank you to our panelists for your time. We're going to shut this down. Thanks so much, guys. All right. Well, you saw. We tried. I do think we saw some common ground there within our guests, but I'm also super happy that the passion came out. There were moments we disagreed, because let's be real, we disagree with each other. That's part of our challenge here. When everyone screams unity, it doesn't just automatically happen. But I do think there were some clear things that we could agree on that we could move forward with if we're ever going to find a way to unify our party in this state. There was unity certainly around the need to have an identity in our party. Whether you like Trump, dislike Trump, we all agree we need an identity, and it can't just be about one person. He's not going to be around for that much longer. We need an identity that goes beyond that. And so building some sort of a brand, because nobody knows what it means to be a Republican in this state. We all agreed we need that brand. We need that work to be done. We know we've got work on infrastructure. Tactically, of course, we need to get better. That wasn't necessarily the focus of this podcast, but we all agree tactically we need to get better. We talked about some specifics. Should the party get involved? It seemed pretty universal. No, not directly, but as I proposed the idea of maybe a benchmark program or some way the party could elevate all of our candidates and encourage candidates to do the blocking and tackling that it takes to win, seemed to be some agreement around that. Certainly seemed to be an agreement around coming up with a plan as to who handles what, a division of labor, some guidance on, okay, the state party is going to do this, the caucuses are going to do that, grassroots are going to focus here, the county parties are going to focus there, ideological organizations are going to focus over here. We don't have enough resources, we don't have enough people to be spread so thin. Can we define what each of us are going to focus on and then work together to accomplish the stated goal? Seemed like there was some agreement on there. Ideology is always going to be a challenge. Not everyone's going to agree that we are going to align with the same candidates. Most of us seem to agree the most conservative candidate who could win. Yes, that does mean that people like the Freedom Caucus or Chesney, though I know he's part of the caucus, some of those districts are very Republican, are very pro-Trump. That's part of our party. We need to embrace that and keep them in our party and support them and work with them. That also means, yes, in some of our counties and our districts that Trump lost by 10 or 13 or 20 in some cases. It might mean those candidates look a little different than a candidate might look in Freeport. Right? Some of these things are things we're going to have to still work on. How can we align? How can we come together? But it did seem like most of us agreed the most conservative candidate who could win. And I think that's part of the challenge here is finding candidates with a high enough quality where they could actually run a winning campaign. We also talked about our party, how we need a big tent, how we need to grow that party. Yeah, that means moderates have got to stop ripping on and attacking conservatives. Conservatives have to stop attacking moderates. We're all part of the same party. Does that mean we're going to accept people who are going to go off and endorse Democrats? No. Are we going to accept people who are going to work against us in general elections? No. But it means that if you have a belief that maybe is different than mine, but you're going to work to elect Republicans, you're going to work to be part of the team, all right, we can get along, even though we do maybe disagree on some of the policies. We saw some of this. There was definitely common ground. We knew we wouldn't solve all the world's problems in one podcast, but I hope that this illustrated there is some common ground. We can start to work together. And here's my plea as we close this down. Chris said it really well. It's about 2030. It's about building towards 2030 so we can have a voice in the next remap. That means we've got to get out of the super minority down in Springfield. We've got to win some of these House seats, some of these Senate seats, and we've got to get the governor's mansion by 2030. That's got to be our goal. So here's my plea to you. If you can't really actually be unified, can you fake it? Can you really find some way, you know what, listen, I don't like you, but we can work together. On this podcast, in our 100th episode, we've proven it. We've had people on this podcast who were competitors, who have said horrible things about me, about my company, about even our podcast, but we've had them on because we're all on the same team. We're trying to practice what we preach here and bringing people in because we're all part of the same party. Can we unify? We need to get to 24 seats in the Senate. Right now we have 19. We need 5 more. We need to get to 48 in the House. We only have 40 right now. That means we need 8 more there. And then yes, we need the governor's mansion by 2030. We're not going to turn the state red by 2030, but can we find some way to put aside our disagreements, stop constantly attacking each other, and find some way to make that tangible progress? Because if we can get the maps, if we can draw the maps in this state, you could actually see this become a purple or heck, dream, maybe a red state. But it won't happen until tactically we make some progress and get better. We didn't solve all the world's problems, but it also wasn't a huge disaster, so I'm going to take that as a win. This is, of course, a super long podcast, so thank you to those who watched this, even if you skipped around a little bit. Especially thanks to our people who were part of this: Collin, Patrick, Kristina, Leslie, of course, Michael and Chris, Lane Davis, our producer. A lot of work went into this. I hope it was helpful. Let's look ahead. 4 months until petitions start getting passed for 2026 elections. We don't have a lot of time to figure this out, but we need to find some way to win, because right now we're irrelevant, we're losing, and that's not fun for any of us. That's why we're fighting each other so much. Let's flip it around, let's get some wins, and then we can start to actually have some more of these debates about how we win even more. So that's my plea. Let's work together, let's get out there, let's go win. Thank you for your time.